Andy, I'm going to have you and Carol and Lena and everybody else up here.
It's been very interesting.
Popular guy.
Okay, this one working too?
I mean, these kids here around the world, you know,
Said he was going to have a panel
Good evening, Albion. Good evening, Albion.
Well, if we want to see the people turn it on, let's not turn it off.
Could you sit closer, Bill? Well, I'm not sure I'm going to really even see the microphone because I've done this so many times. I think everyone can probably hear me. Okay, like just the microphone. There we go. Okay, I think this is everyone that's coming. It's a late start here, and good evening. My name is Frank Demling. I'm the project manager for the Salmon Creek project and the Albion River Bridge project. Tonight, we've got a number of subject matter experts from Caltrans. We start here left to right with Brian James, project archaeologist, Kendall Schinke, the senior archaeologist, Bill Bertucci, who is an engineering geologist with the Office of Geotechnical Design North, Harold Caslin, who's the chief for the Northern District for Northern California for structures maintenance investigations, and his branch chief, Andrew Porter, also from structures maintenance investigation. They've got a presentation tonight to talk about the roles that structures maintenance investigations plays with inspecting not just these two bridges, but many other bridges in the northern part of the state. But tonight, we've got some updates on a couple issues that I know everyone's interested in. And I'll start first with the supplemental value analysis study. Jim Hyde contacted me asking if I would go back and find out if it was possible to move the VA study down to the coast here. And I went ahead and talked to management and talked to the consultant, and was also asked if I could move the date past the, beyond the first of the year. So I did talk to management and the consultant, and we are going to look for another date after the first of the year, and we will bring that supplemental VA study down to the coast. Now, there's going to be 5 representatives from the community. 2 will be for the Salmon Creek project, 3 for Albion. Now, for Salmon Creek, right now it looks like Janet Pauley, who will be representing the Salmon Creek property owners. And then for the Pacific Reefs area, it's currently Terry Searles is the one who's volunteered. For the Albion, right now the only confirmed seat is John Johansson. However, Jim Hyde has volunteered, and also John Danhackle, who is a part-time resident, volunteered, and I believe there were others who have volunteered. Since we're putting this off now to after the first of the year, there's really no urgency to actually select community members tonight, but we could certainly entertain nominations if anyone is interested or wants to step up and put their name in the hat. Nobody's jumping up. Okay. Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
Are there other stakeholders who will be represented in this process?
Stakeholders as far as external to Caltrans, or?
Yes.
Well, we've offered a seat to Coastal Commission staff. They may be able to attend, but aside from that, typically the value analysis study is made up of subject matter experts from Caltrans. This is a supplemental VA study. The original VA study took place in October of 2013.
Well, presumably stakeholders still fulfill the same roles within the supplemental process as they did in the original.
Well, in the original, it was all made up of internal Caltrans staff, from bridge design to geotech, from environmental, etc. So you're asking for if there are other outside agencies then that are participating? Because the
Outside interests, for example, in this area, the Association of Innkeepers, others who are affected by the project, Sierra Club environmental organizations.
well, typically a value analysis study doesn't include more than 12 to 14 based on, we've hired a consultant, value management strategies. I can certainly talk to Fred Colano. I'm willing to go back and see if there are any additional people that are stakeholders, as you mentioned, that could be added. But, you know, once you get a team past 12 to 14 people, it's not really that effective, and it's very technical in nature.
I hate to harp on this, but my understanding was that the representation in this process required by the Highway Administration was for the people, not just the community members who are extremely important, but the others who are affected, for example, by what happens with these 2 bridges. There are a number of people with economic interests in addition to the property owners adjacent to it, and in addition to the commercial interests within the town of Albion.
Right, well, that would be more along the lines of having the community impact assessment, and we did advertise for that meeting, and we certainly would be open to getting their input in the process. So that's something that we'll make a note of.
Okay, maybe you can talk about it.
Yes, certainly. Okay, well, anyway, as far as the supplemental VA study, that again occurring after the first of the year, I'll send out a doodle poll and we'll see if we can't get a date that's going to work for everyone. I know that Jim has been nominated by many of you folks in the community, and I'm not certain if there are any other folks within the community that are interested in representing Albion. I know that Rod Lorimer was nominated, but he's withdrawn his name. So are there any other folks that may be interested? Dave?
Yeah, I'll go for it.
Dave Wiley? Okay, Warren DeSmith?
I'm just willing to provide imagery and videos to Jim or whoever else wants it.
Thanks, Eric.
I have thousands of images and a lot of
Okay.
videos that
Okay,
maybe
Well-
a consulting member.
okay, thank you. Okay, we're gonna go and hit the next hot topic, and that was the Phase 2 investigation. That is part of our requirements under Section 106, and this, one moment, let me pull my mouse here. Well, as you know, we were seeking a permit from the Coastal Commission for the Phase 2 investigation. We were on the November 8th agenda. We had been working with coastal staff to get some conditions in place for the permit. We did, initially we were on the agenda for October under a permit waiver, but there was some community input that I was contacted by a coastal analyst, and we agreed to have the permit withdrawn from the consent calendar and go with the regular staff report. We went ahead and prepared the information that coastal staff requested on how this investigation would take place. We also had some court order entry that was going to allow us to go onto the campground property, and that did require 72 hours notice. But through a series of miscommunications that occurred, the consultant, Pacific Legacy, was under the impression that the permit had already been gotten, and that they weren't aware of the 72 hours notice. And these were issues that had to do with my not communicating with the team, and I'm the one that's responsible for this happening. So today I met out with, on site with Daryl Sheffrey, who's the campground manager, and I've been talking to Tamara Geddick, who's the coastal analyst, and we've been working to come up with a plan on how to stabilize and clean up this site, and we've got some ideas, talking to Daryl on what might work. Still need to go back to the Coastal Commission. There's probably a good chance we can get on the consent calendar for next time, unless they allow the work to go forward under an emergency permit, which they may. But I'm still in the process of working out some of these final details with the coastal staff. So please be patient, I'll get it figured out. And again, I'm sorry for the miscommunication. I'm the one that's responsible. Sir.
Good evening. I'm Robert Dahl. I represent John Van Ackle,
Okay.
as does my partner Stevie Dahl. And our client would not be in support of Caltrans remediating the violation without first presenting it to the community.
Okay.
Secondly, clarifying that Caltrans committed a violation of the Coastal Act, which is a very serious issue, because it is
What specific section do you think we violated?
30600A, the requirement to get a coastal permit before you do any development, and you did grading, you did destruction of environmentally sensitive habitat.
No, that's not true. Ice Plains isn't considered sensitive.
Dunes are considered ESHA. And I've been doing coastal management for 43 years.
Okay.
And used to represent.
Well, I did talk to the coastal staff. I talked to the North Coast director, and he said no violation would be issued. So at this point, that's correct. And
Bob Merrill?
Bob Merrill.
May I ask when he did that?
That was, when I talked to Tamara Geddick, she said that she spoke to Bob, and based on the work that was done, this was, I'm going to say, maybe the 2nd or 3rd of November. So what would be the purpose of that?
Well, the community obviously has a very strong interest in, A, maintaining the integrity of the berm, which has been.
Right, but at the same time, we were seeking a permit to conduct a Phase 2 investigation under Section 106, and we were seeking a permit for that. Okay, so what's the purpose of a violation? Does the community want their pound of flesh? Is that what we're talking about?
No, California has laws, and Caltrans in 1976, through the then director, Jim Turco, agreed to those provisions. And we think it's our client thinks it's very important that the restoration, number one, be done to fully, completely restore both the berm and the environmentally sensitive habitat.
Okay, well, that's noted, but at the same time, I think this community knows that I've gone out of my way to be transparent, provide information, and work with them on all these issues.
Yes,
I
we
mean-
do know that,
Okay,
Frank.
thank you. So, I appreciate your comments, but we're not gonna go into that tonight. I'm working with the Coastal Commission staff. You're welcome to submit your comments, but we're gonna move on, okay? Thank you. Okay, now let's go, Dan.
You use the term dune. Now, what's the difference between a dune and a berm?
I don't know, Dan. I think that there are probably some experts in the House that may know that. It's been termed as a foredune, it's a berm, it's basically man-made. I know that there are lots of, you've got a lot of debris from some of the old lumber mill stacked in here with logs, and it was identified as a potential archaeological site, and it was by Pacific Legacy's work back, maybe Kendall, maybe you or Brian would like to answer that? More specifically about the nature of the phase two?
So, there it is. Yeah, so the berm, dune, what have you, comprises multiple layers of 6 actual remnant lumber mills that had burned down and were flooded subsequently from the 1860s all the way up till the mill was abandoned in the late 1950s, I believe. And on top of that deposit of archaeological material is some pushed up debris. Some have characterized it as potentially some sort of seawall or some sort of sea break. We also noted that there was quite a substantial amount of dune sand capping it, with ice plant roots going down about 2 feet or so into the dune sand. Now, that was fairly surprising because from the side profile, when you get out to the beach, it didn't look quite like that much sand had been accumulated on top of the sawdust, but the sawdust is so mixed up and churned up into that sand dune a little bit, it kind of masks what's really going on. And that's kind of what the phase 2 evaluation is geared towards doing, is getting a cross-cut profile of the archaeological deposit to assess whether or not this is a significant portion of the historical record, something that we're required to do prior to any kind of disturbance, therefore, in the project. Hypothetically, if you're going to build a bridge and you're going to basically get rid of this dune feature as part of that, to actually false work, etc., that's an effect. And if we have an effect, we have to determine if that's an adverse effect to the historic property. Now, if it turns out that this historic property has no significance to the overall history, then we are done and we've complied with Section 106, no adverse effect. So that's the nature of the work.
And we were assuming eligibility on this, is that correct?
We're assuming eligibility for this purpose because we don't have access to the entire archaeological property, which is the entire Albion Lumber Mill flat. Or that's what the archaeological site is called, the Albion Lumber Mill. There are multiple other features within the archaeological property that we are not going to assess because we are not going to affect them through this project. But assuming eligibility, because of the fact we cannot say this is an eligible property or not through our conventional methods. We can only say it is eligible for the purposes of this project, so we can assess the effect we're having to it through this berm being disturbed through any kind of false work or any kind of construction. And therefore, that's why we assume the eligibility.
Great. Thanks, Brian.
Yep.
More on that?
Dan?
So if it's a dune, that means it was naturally formed. Isn't that kind of the idea of a dune that's being moved by sand and air, etc.? But if it's a berm, doesn't that mean that it's been man-made? And it was man-made for a purpose of keeping the high tides or...
Yeah, that's my understanding, Dan. It was man-made and it was built to keep the floodwaters from coming into the campground.
So by doing this work, there's a crisscross of logs that were the base of whatever this berm is. And by going down and taking everything that isn't organic, that's not the term you're using, but you're removing the ice plant and I forget the term of everything else you're removing. Debris. you're removing the debris. Would the logs be considered debris?
I would think they would be considered debris.
So if you take out the logs,
I don't think the logs are going to be removed. I'm not.
But would that be debris?
I think that this was again satisfying a requirement under section 106. And, you know, I think that what was provided by Civic Legacy in their report, they identified these two locations for their phase 2 investigation.
but how is that answering the question?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know if,
The question is, will they remove the logs?
I'm not sure that they will remove the logs.
If they do,
Well, they were going to go down 5 feet. That's what the plan was. 3.5 foot wide trench down to about 5 feet to look for deposits.
The 5 feet is basically to not have to go into OSHA compliance with the shoring. We don't want to get any lower because then we have to expose it even more, put up shoring, have the correct slope and everything, you know, that would be, you know, even more destructive potentially. Logs that are within this berm formation, that whatever detritus was pushed up on top of what is probably intact archaeological deposits, that stuff, if we encounter it, you know, there's methods of setting that stuff aside potentially, but no, we weren't planning on removing any kind of large debris necessarily if we didn't have to. It was mostly getting down to that archaeological deposit to figure out what is going on there and if that has any significant archaeological data that's going to contribute to the history of, you know, Mendocino County, California, et cetera.
And this is a listed site, is that correct?
The site is not listed.
Not listed yet. It's eligible for listing, but it's actually identified as a...
It's identified as an archaeological historic property. It's not listed or actually determined eligible by any methods like Section 106 compliance. That's we're assuming eligibility only because of the fact we can't look at the whole property. Right now, it is still undetermined if it's eligible or not.
So Dan, to answer your question, I'm trying to get to you a second. To answer your question, I don't see that the logs would be considered anything other than debris. And I can't see that they would be removed based on what would be under the phase 2 investigation, what they would be looking for.
but if you're going down 5 feet and the logs are encountered at 3.5 feet.
Then I guess you just leave the logs in place, you dig around them. Brian, so that if you go down 3 feet, 3.5 feet, and you come against the log, you don't remove the log, you just dig around it at that point.
Oh yeah, because essentially our trenches were only meant to bisect. If we encounter a large log, we're not going to cut the log in half to get down past
Or
it.
you're not going to remove
Or
the log
remove
either.
it, yeah. Anything that's an obstruction is just going to be treated as such and left in place.
I'll get to you in a minute. Let me go to Mary Rose real quick. She had her hand up.
I'm Mary Rose Kazarowski, I'm with the Mendocino Beacon, and I have two questions. First of all, it's been noted there's 6 lumber mills historically have been on the site, going back to the 1800s. And there's so much documentation and photographs and a lot of historical documentation of the existence of these lumber mills and all the associated buildings and, you know, the works that go with the lumber mill. So there's been a lot of question of why do you have to dig to find historical remnants when we know this has already been several years, you know, over 100 years of historical buildings and operations. And my other question is the berm placed there to protect the campground or the bridge? Because that was a question that's been not answered. Thank you for your answer.
So the first question, everything you said is true, and that is all what we call historic context. It's apparent just by looking at the flat that none of that stuff is really there in any capacity anymore. There's no more, you know, historic buildings are not erected. There is no built environment aside from the bridge there anymore that we can see with our eyes just on the surface. Going over to the berm, there seems to be some potentially intact archaeological deposits. Now, when you're assessing an effect to an archaeological property, one of the things you're looking for is integrity. If there's no integrity to the archaeological deposit, then you cannot say that it is significant and therefore not necessarily eligible or not being adversely affected. So knowing that we have all this history, 100 years, we have documentation, we have a good literature review, a good record of everything that transpired there. Now, under Section 106, what we were trying to do, if we were going to impact this archaeological property, we want to know that we are not affecting it in such a way that we are literally destroying the archaeological record in the process. And the only way to do that is to do some very minor destructive efforts to assess whether or not there's a bigger impact going to happen. That's why we dig. We dig to profile a cross-section, say, this is the data, this is the potential, this is, if it's intact, it has integrity, therefore it is eligible. If it's not intact, has no integrity, there's no contributing data that offers anything to the archaeological or historic record, not eligible, you can get rid of it and it's no adverse effect. So everything you said is true. We have this history, but it doesn't determine what the effect is just by knowing that we have this history. And then to the berm question, whether or not it protects the campground or the bridge, I think that's a matter of personal opinion or perspective, because we have no documentation of this.
No, we do though.
My question was it put in place for the campground or the bridge? Do you know when that was put in place and why? Because it wasn't done based on personal opinion, it was done for a reason.
I'm saying for the reason is
Okay.
potentially up in the air, because I don't know, because we have as-bills that have nothing. I went through all the as-bills for when this bridge was built in 1943. There was nothing in the as-bills even remotely recommending any kind of artificial structure be placed around the bridge. So it's obviously not part of the bridge being built.
Right.
It's not in our plans. It was never put into the as-bills as part of the project to build the bridge. That's what we know.
Well, the first timber tower is not protected by the berm, and it's sitting on, I believe, 20 to 40 foot piles, sitting on top of pile caps. We need to get to John here first, John.
I don't think you really have to do too much looking to see that that berm is protecting the foundations for the northern part of that bridge. And to that extent, I've been through the as-bills also many times, and it has nothing to do with what they did when they built the bridge. But it's obviously there protecting the foundations, and to that extent, it's protecting an historic asset. There's no question about that.
And I would say that your observation is potentially valid, but we have nothing documenting that action being done, and it's not codified anywhere.
All you have to do is look at it. It's
I
protecting the foundation of
understand.
a historic property. It's already on the National Register. How can you say to get rid of that is not
Okay,
going to...
we're not getting rid of the berm,
Well,
John.
that's what he's trying to say.
Well, actually, what I think what he's trying to say is the two areas that were identified for the phase 2 investigation, again, is required. We need to get in there, we need to do the investigation. It wasn't done the way that we had hoped, of course, and we're now working with the Coastal Commission to correct the problem.
Right, but it's the need for the investigation that I'm concerned about. There was no need to do an investigation on that. It's obvious what it is. It's protecting an historic property. And you're saying that the result of your investigation is going to say, well, you can take it out of there because it's not going to affect the archaeological history of that area.
No, I don't think
What about
that
the
was,
bridge?
yeah, I don't think what's being suggested, John, was that the berm would be removed. That's not what's being suggested.
No, I'm talking procedurally. If we determine something isn't eligible, then any kind of construction that could happen to it is cleared under Section 106 to happen because there's no adverse effect to the property.
But there is an adverse effect on the property.
So we're talking contextually about this project and specifically, yes. No, there's not, because we don't know what's underneath that berm. We don't know what the intact archaeological deposit looks like, and we don't know what the data potential is.
If I might.
Yes.
Following up on John's comment, what seems to be missing here is a shoreline processes analysis prior to the decision as to how to do the archaeological.
We did have a shoreline analysis done by our district hydraulics engineer, and it is available on the staff report with the coastal staff.
And it addresses the effects of, for example, bleaching the dune berm.
Well, it does. Have you looked at the staff report?
I have not looked at that
Okay.
particular part, but
Okay.
I'm sorry, the gentleman who referred to the archaeological study said he didn't know. So was the archaeological study designed with that in mind?
The hydraulic analysis was completed by our district hydraulics engineer, and that information was made part of the staff report for the coastal development permit application, and that was included so that that discussion would take place with the coastal commission staff.
Did
So
the archaeological consultant take it into account any more than they took into account the fact that they needed a permit, or that they needed to give 72 hours notice?
Wasn't the consultant's responsibility to give the 72 hours notice, it was Caltrans' responsibility to give the 72 hours notice. Did the archaeologists take that into account? They weren't required to take that into account. That was Caltrans' responsibility. That's why we had the district's hydraulics engineer conduct that study. And that was made part of the staff report. Norbert?
Forgive me, you first.
Thank you.
Beth?
So what we have is an extant rampart protecting piers, a foundation, and a house where a family lives. The house is movable. The house is movable.
Okay. We have a lot to cover tonight, so I just want to get down, let's just get down to what the question is.
Okay, all right, the question is, how was it that they went in there and destroyed the lip of a rampart? How is it that the archaeologists never identified the berm as a seawall as it was? It seems to me that you're...
That was not the archaeologist's responsibility. It was, we had our district hydraulics engineer do the hydraulics analysis for the wave runoff and overtopping. And that information, again, was included in the staff report, and the conclusion was that there would not be overtopping on that berm so that it would be significant enough to actually cause any damage to the berm and affect the campground. That is in the staff report. Has anybody seen the staff report?
That kind
Did you
of
see the hydraulics analysis?
Yeah.
Okay.
That kind of trenching, though, could very well have created a channel. So at the next big winter surge,
Well, and let me just say, Beth, when I was coordinating this with the consultant, what we were looking to do was have the trenching take place back from the face of that dune, okay? What had happened was when they got out there, they found that it had retreated approximately 10 feet from the aerial photograph that was actually showing where that trenching should begin. They went out there with their GPS and they actually located where to start the trenching, and they actually cut into the dune face. So if anything, I didn't communicate clearly with them to stay back from the dune face. Okay, now we've got to fix the problem, so I'm working with coastal
Well,
staff.
where's the common sense? I mean, that's what's so unbelievable, that they would destroy the lip of the berm and invite the next surge in. Where,
Okay, Norbert, do you have another question?
To follow up, would it be possible for you to post that wave runoff study hydrologic report
It's on
to
the,
website?
it's on the Coastal Commission website.
It wasn't as of beginning of last week.
Did they take it down? It was,
It was not on the website at that point.
the staff
Unless it was
report.
buried in a link that.
No, the staff report was on there as well as all the other
If
documentation.
you could post it to the website.
I can do
That
that.
would really help.
Sure.
Transparency.
Sure,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Dan, one more question, then we're gonna move.
Sir, quickly. Everything that Caltrans has said about that up until when the actual problem.
Said about what, Dan?
I'm sorry.
Said about what?
It was called a dune. And.
Okay, we're not gonna get caught in the semantics. It's a dune, it's a foredune, it's a berm,
By
okay.
calling it a dune to the coastal commission, they're seeing something that's moving sand, or they're seeing something that just happened there. If it's a berm, that means it was placed there. It's something that they put logs down, they did this, they put sawdust, etc.
You have a question, Dan?
Yes.
Okay.
Could Caltrans quit using the term dune and start calling it berm?
Well, I'm not sure where we use berm or where we use dune or foredune.
But that's what I was saying though,
Okay.
that Caltrans has never used the term berm, it's always been dune. And somehow when it goes to coastal commission, it seems like they see dune. And I know when Tamara got.
No, I think they knew full well that it was man-made because I believe, based on just some anecdotal information, that 70 years ago, much of the timbers from the old mills were actually placed in that location, and it was built up, and I believe Caltrans may have actually been the ones that gone out there and actually planted the ice plant, and it was most likely placed there in part to protect the campground, in part to probably to protect the bridge.
Hey, Frank?
Yes.
You have, basically, you do have what they call a Julian process going on. You have dune
building up over this berm is what you have. That's actually a graded area. And they built it up high enough.
Can't hear you.
Okay. They built that area up high enough so they could construct buildings that would. Testing. Okay, sorry. Basically, what we're talking about in terms of the historical presence of the ground, it was actually manufactured. Grading went on, they built it up to a certain level, they felt that was safe enough, they can build buildings, and they wouldn't be basically washed away. At the same time, what you have on beaches is an aeolian process. That's wind-blown sand, simply speaking. And this process is going on all the time. In fact, sand is built up there on top of the berm, and ice plants were eventually planted, and that stabilizes it. Some of them have been removed during the trenching operation. My feeling is these trenches wouldn't be just left open, so they'd be exposed to wave action. Basically, these trenches, like a geotechnical trench exploration, we backfill them and compact them. They can be replanted. So it's not a seawall, but it is a raised piece of ground that will indeed wave action getting further into the campground. And the bridge was not designed, for example, that ground is not protecting the existing bridge foundations. That design is based on deep piles and based on the engineering practice of that time. And our engineering practices have changed considerably. And that's another reason why we want to consider replacing that bridge. It does not meet engineering standards of 2017. But again, those trenches won't be left open, and they shouldn't be left open. They'll be backfilled and compacted properly.
So Bill, one question. It's that same question I was asking Frank. What's the difference between a berm and a dune?
I think this is clearly a topic of interest. So what I'd like to offer is that we do the presentation we have scheduled tonight. We've invited people to come here and we are obligated to continue discussing this with you. We'll stay late tonight. We'll come back and discuss it more. But I think we're obligated also, there's already been a woman that's left who planned her time to come here to present the information we have, and we will stay and continue to have a dialogue of the interest of the group. So, I want to move forward with this and make that commitment for the future.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and take some time to have a presentation by Structures Maintenance Investigations, Errol Caslin, Andrew Porter, and who wants to go first? Errol?
I'll go ahead and go first. I want to thank Frank for inviting us to come here. Can everybody hear me, or do you guys need a microphone? Microphone? Okay. Yes. Excuse me. I've been fighting a cold the last couple of days, so if I'm a little hoarse, please bear with me. Yes, my name is Errol Caslin. I am the Office Chief for Structure Investigations, working out of our headquarters-based Structure Maintenance and Investigations Office. Our office is that office within Caltrans that's responsible for conducting all the bridge inspections and bridge condition assessments in the state. This is in compliance with the Code of Federal Regulations and the National Bridge Inspection Standards. In Northern California, this encompasses some 15,800 odd state and local structures. So we're in the business of doing bridge inspection, bridge condition assessment, and we also are that lead office in Caltrans that is responsible for bridge asset management. That is the allocation of funding for bridges, the determination of required maintenance work, rehabilitation work, and the recommendations to districts for replacement options. And so we're the office that originally in 2007 arrived at the recommendation to District 1 to consider replacing the Albion Bridge. So I wanted to come and speak to you tonight. Frank asked if we could come, so we came from Sacramento. And one of the reasons why was to explain our inspection procedures, to provide some clarity to our reporting procedures that may that may provide some transparency to what we put down on paper in our bridge inspection reports, to explain some differences in the NBI appraisal ratings that occurred from one inspection to the next. I know some of you may have had some questions about that. And then Andy is going to provide you the results of our most recent in-depth inspection of the bridge. I'll also be able to speak to some statements that I have read or heard and about certain aspects of the bridge health, the bridge longevity, and so on and so forth. And I'm here also to take and answer any of the questions that you have concerning the bridge condition and the decision process that we had to arrive at a recommendation for replacement. So with that, I'm going to speak first to our bridge inspection reports, right? All of our bridge inspections are fully documented in a written bridge inspection report. Our bridge inspections are conducted by an NHI certified team leader. That is a certification, a national required legal certification for the team leader to be trained on site. All of our inspections are conducted by NHI trained team leaders. And in almost all cases, these team leaders are also registered professional engineers in California. That's unique to California. It doesn't occur nationwide, right? We have engineers on site at every bridge inspection, just about every bridge inspection. Our bridge inspection procedures, we have been inspecting bridges in California and performing condition assessments since the 1920s. There's been a lot of evolution in the way we report things. A big evolution occurred in the 1970s with the enactment of the National Bridge Inspection Standards, which is a federal law that dictated that all publicly owned bridges that carry traffic or cross traffic need to be inspected once every 2 years, have their condition assessed, have that information digitized into a data set, and that data set reported to Federal Highway Administration and ultimately to Congress. And so our reports are tailored to that mission. And what we do when we create a bridge inspection report, we fully inspect the bridge, usually a visual inspection, although there are other types of more in-depth inspections that are performed. For example, on fracture critical bridges, we must perform a hands-on, up-close, 24-inch visual inspection of all the fracture critical members of the bridge, and we do that on Albion. That bridge is fracture critical. Underwater inspections for those elements that are constantly submerged and are not available for direct inspection, we do dive those, so on and so forth. Part of the reporting that we do consists of a lot of commentary, right? We emphasize the written portion of our bridge inspection reports. And you can see here, if one reads the reports, that there's a lot of information that's contained in the commentary. But we're also required to digitize a lot of that condition into numerical data, right, that is suitable for use in a bridge management system. These are algorithms that are used to determine basically needs of our nation's infrastructure. In 1972, up until the early 90s, the way to do this was to assign what we called a condition rating or component rating to those major components of a bridge structure, right? That would be the bridge deck. That's where the tires really meet the road, right? That portion that supports the vehicles. The bridge superstructure, which supports the bridge deck, and the bridge substructure, which supports the bridge superstructure, right? Three main components. Each one of those components was assigned a numerical value of 0 through 9, 0 being terrible and 9 being terrific. And those values are still used to this day. And so when one talks about the component ratings or the appraisal ratings, that's what we're talking about, right? These values of 0 through 9. In the 90s, though, you can see that the simple assignment of a single-digit number to describe a complex structure, such as Albion Bridge or San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge, for that matter, was kind of oversimplified, right? And so element-level bridge inspection data collection was recommended by AASHTO, and California adopted that in the 90s, and we began collecting element-level data. This means that we took a complex structure, like Albion, we took the component of the bridge deck, and we broke that down into its constituent subcomponents. Each one of those subcomponents was assigned a specific condition, and the quantity of that specific condition was digitized, that occurred for the superstructure elements and the substructure elements. Now, Federal Highway Administration and Congress, right, since the 70s had been collecting that 0 through 9 data, they still wanted that 0 through 9 data. And so we adopted a computer algorithm that was set forth by FHWA to take that element level data and translate it into that 0 through 9 data. I know, bear with me, I'm going to get to the end here, okay? So that was our practice, most certainly from 1997 all the way up until 2014. And that yielded a consistent body of data that we reported to Federal Highway Administration and that we also used to supplement our own evaluations. So what occurred in 2014 was a mandate that came out as part of the MAP 21 Act, right, moving ahead for progress in the 21st century, that said now all states, it's not a recommendation you use element data, all states now have to use element data. And we abandoned the old element data set that we had used in the 90s, and we adopted the new AASHTO elements. Okay? With that adoption of the new bridge elements, they were much more granular, for lack of a better term. They were much more highly detailed. They were also uniform in how their conditions were assessed, as far as condition states only 4 as opposed to 3, 4, or 5 in the older elements. And the quantification was more accurately, or I should say more precisely defined. Along with that, though, that translator, right, that algorithm that took that element data and translated it into that 0 through 9, right, was also changed. No longer did FHWA offer a sponsored algorithm, so Caltrans developed our own. Now, the model for that algorithm, for those computer geeks out there, is kind of based on a Bridge Health Index formula. And I'm not going to get into that tonight. There's ample internet reference material, and I encourage you to go look at the BHI. But we based it on that, and we knew that there was going to be a change. And we knew that when we did this, that those component ratings that had been stable for some time were going to undergo a change under certain structures. And so on our bridge inspection reports, we put this notice, right, front and center on the bridge inspection reports. And I don't know if you could read that, but what it says here, I'm going to read the last sentence of the first paragraph, and it says, the new element inspection methodology may result in changes to related condition and appraisal ratings on the bridge without significant physical changes at the bridge, right? We knew that that was a possibility, so we put that out there as a notice, right? All recipients of a bridge inspection report, keep in mind about half the bridges in California are owned by local agencies, and they do receive these reports. We wanted to make it very clear that there was going to be a change and we were aware of it. After July 2014, we kept a very close eye on how these appraisal ratings were being calculated by our algorithm. And we recognized within 8 months that a revision to that algorithm was required. And so in July 2015, we took our own in-house algorithm and we made an adjustment to it. Right? What that did and what we saw was a better alignment of the element level data to the bridge appraisal data, that 0 through 9 value, and we're satisfied with that. Now we expect another revision to that algorithm to occur likely in 2018, July 2018. We're working on that because it's important to make sure that those component ratings are consistent, that they stand up to FHWA program review and audit, and that the data that's provided and used by the bridge owners is of value and use, right? We don't take any of that lightly. I also want to make clear that an individual bridge inspector at this moment, historically, could not make any physical changes to those component ratings. They're not allowed to. Our bridge management system does not allow a manual change to that component value by an inspector. The inspector is required to go out and make observations of the bridge using our element manual, element inspection manual as a guideline, and federal documents as a guideline, and AASHTO documents as a guideline, quantify that condition, talk about the condition, fully describe it, and then let our bridge management system and our algorithms then calculate that value. So with that, I wanted, do you got a report here you can show where I can show you the difference in that?
Would you want to look back to the old report, Harold?
Yeah, let's go back to the one that occurred, I believe we have one from early 2014. I'm a little dry, excuse me.
Yeah. Use your USB stick.
Is that on there? Oh, I think I emailed that to you.
The 2014 one, I'm not sure, I just heard it out there.
Let me see if I can grab it.
Well, you know,
Keep talking.
Okay, so a couple of reports I sent along just to illustrate. I wanted to illustrate the older way that we were doing things with the old element data set, the appraisal ratings that were generated by the FHWA translator, then the post-July 2014 newer elements. You can see they're much more extensive and granular, and the component rating that was generated by Caltrans converter algorithm, just to show the differences. And then yet another one, and another one, right, that will show the differences that were that occurred based on our adjustments in our bridge management system. Now, it's not only the algorithm, one moment, sir, not only the algorithm that has changed, but one must understand that a bridge, particularly a bridge constructed of the materials that Albion is, it has condition changes based on from year to year, right? Our inspections are conducted about once every 2 years. We may do them more frequently based on reports that we get back to the field, or to provide our design staff more accurate information to scope certain projects. But we can expect conditions to change. A temporary steel bridge in a marine environment is going to experience more fluid changes than other material types. Yes, sir.
I think most of us, if we've been paying attention, have seen the ratings or been aware of the ratings from 0 to 9. And while I appreciate your fluidity, to use a terrible term with this, do those ratings still apply? I mean, because on the ground here, that's what we're hearing and that's what we're aware of. Right?
So that's a very good question, and your question, as I understand it, do those ratings still apply? And the answer to that is yes, but within what context, right? Now, originally those component ratings were used to determine structure condition for the entire nation's inventory, right? And prior to '72, there was no unified way of determining the condition of our nation's bridge infrastructure. This was a way that was put out there to be able to digitize in 1970s fashion the condition of the nation's bridges. And these values were used in certain formulas to determine things like functional obsolescence, right? Structural deficiency, which are all big kind of sounding definitions. But ultimately what they meant was the bridges had some deficiency and were eligible for federal funding. Right? This is really what, at the end of the day, what these values were for. Now, Caltrans,
It doesn't mean they're unsafe.
oh, of course not. Of course not. It doesn't mean that the fact that a bridge may have gained one of these monikers of functionally obsolescent or structurally deficient, it doesn't mean they're unsafe. Functionally obsolescent or functionally obsolete basically means for the traffic volume on the bridge, right? The bridge is considered to be too narrow. Right? Not enough lanes. It doesn't have anything to do with bicycles or sidewalks. It has to do with bridge width relative to traffic volume. And that is a federal formula that was set forth in the 70s. Structurally deficient means that the bridge may have certain conditions that make it not up to par with bridges that we design today. Now, these conditions could relate to just its design characteristics, right? One could see that a 1920s truss bridge that was designed to sustain Model Ts, right, is a light design bridge. When we apply modern highway loading to that, we find that it's deficient in its capacity to carry highway loading. So a bridge in perfect condition, but a light design may be deemed structurally deficient just on that, right? Similarly, structurally deficient could be based on bridge condition, a deteriorated condition or a dilapidated condition. And so that could happen as well. Now, for state-owned bridges, I'm here to say the mission of my office and my engineers is to keep our infrastructure safe. That's what we're here for. The intent of the NBIS was to protect public safety, right? Our tax dollars are being put back into a bridge inspection program that we all benefit from, that we can rest assured that bridges in our country are inspected regularly, their condition assessed, their load capacity determined once every 2 years in the Bear State. So Albion is a safe bridge. Yes, sir.
You have a highway between Albion and Fort Bragg, the hospital in Fort Bragg. There are 8 bridges on that highway. How do those bridges stack up against Albion?
I don't have that data in front of me, so I can't give you a direct answer, but I'll be happy to provide that to Frank so that you can see. I can tell you that those bridges are reinforced concrete, maybe pre-stressed concrete. My understanding is that they're in generally fair condition, but I really don't want to answer that until I have a good answer for you.
You must have had the data to make the decision to start at Albion instead of Bear Creek.
So there is no start and stop, right, when we consider bridge replacement. I should say that there may be a lot of ideas about how one should manage an inventory of bridge structures, and that may be one of them. But when it came to Albion, it came to the point to where the condition was such, right? The continued corrosion, need for paint, the condition of the timber substructure, I'm not taking that lightly, the condition of the bridge deck, the fact that the bridge rail is not safe for current crash standards, all these things were brought to bear when it came time for us to make a recommendation. And those are the things that we considered. We didn't look at a route concept. Now I would say, to certainly validate your statement, as we move into asset management into the 21st century, such concepts are being discussed. But in the case of Albion, when that recommendation was made in 2007, we didn't look at Highway 1 and say, well, okay, what are the needs of all of Highway 1, say, between the Russian River and Fort Bragg?
Well, there are a lot of people in Albion who are concerned about getting to the hospital in an emergency. If there's a catastrophic emergency, how are we going to get to Fort Bragg?
Well, John, let me just answer. Step in for just a moment, John. Okay, right now the Herrick Creek Bridge is programmed, but it's for a widening and rail upgrade. It's not going to be replaced. Russian Gulch may be replaced, it may be widened. If it is widened and the rail is upgraded, then it would need to be seismically retrofitted. The Jack Peters Bridge is going to be widened and the rails will be upgraded to current standards. Little River is also going to be replaced because it's in an area that could be subject to liquefaction. So the recommendation now from Geotech is to replace each one of these bridges that we're talking about between Albion and Fort Bragg are programmed for either replacement or for widening with a rail upgrade to current standards.
But if you were going to build a new road from here to Fort Bragg, you wouldn't start here, you'd start in Fort Bragg, and pick up everybody along the way. Every time when you finish Hare Creek, everybody in Simpson Lane, thousands of people that live on Simpson Lane would have a road to the hospital in an emergency. But
well, these decisions are made. These decisions, John, are made in headquarters. There's a program advisor for the bridge program.
You made that decision, you didn't think about that.
I can say that the condition assessments that were that came into our office for the bridges that were in and around the area didn't indicate such a severe condition that warranted really kind of looking at it. And I'm not, like I said, sir, I'd like to get the data first before I can respond to this, appropriately.
One mitigating factor, you just spent $1 million doing a seismic upgrade on the center span of the bridge. So that's a lot safer than it was, a couple of years ago.
So seismic vulnerability, let's see if we can break this down into a couple of different definitions, right? So there's bridge condition, bridge health, let's talk about that, right? This would be the overall condition of the bridge. How sound are the primary elements that support the bridge itself and the traffic upon it? And then there's bridge safety. Bridge safety could be defined, and we do define this as the ability of the rail to redirect errant vehicles, right, so that they don't go over the side.
It's worked for 75 years.
Well, sir, I'm not finished. And then there is bridge vulnerability. Vulnerability is the bridge's ability to withstand extreme events such as earthquake or scour. So In each one of these categories, we find that we have been working very hard to keep the bridge health in good condition, I should say in fair condition. A lot of taxpayer dollars have gone into maintaining Albion, and we are seeing that we actually have been successful by several projects and the day labor work from our bridge crew in keeping the bridge in fair condition and keeping it safe.
I think you've done an excellent job taking care of that bridge for 75 years. It's a feather in your cap.
Thank you,
You guys
sir.
should be proud of it. You should be bragging about it.
Well, sir,
Don't
it's,
try to tear it down.
so perhaps it's time now. Does anybody have any questions about the way that we got to a component reading pre-July 14 to post-July 14? Okay, who's first?
Well, what I'm kind of wondering is where does this fall in, we're getting the information of where it stands today?
Okay.
So you ran all these different
Right.
tests, but where are we at today?
Andy's going to show you some pictures of where we are today, and I just poked him in the face. The bridge, I'm going to summarize, the bridge is in overall fair condition. However, it is in a state of deterioration. We are working hard to arrest that deterioration and keep it at bay, but soon, and I mean soon, within a decade or two, large action, large rehabilitative action is going to be required to keep the bridge at its current level of service.
There, I don't have any notes to put up, but there was a number on either the 13 or the 15 report that, thank you.
No? Okay.
In either the 13 or the 15 report that showed a rating in that 0 to 9 number, and it spiked down. And I think you were trying to address that.
That's precisely right. If you take a look at the numbers that remained in the substructure rating, right? NBI item 60, I believe, that for some period of inspections prior to the migration to the newer elements, that was a fairly stable assessment, right? In the 6 or 7 range, thereabouts. And then we see after July 2014, that number went to 3, correct? And it was precisely those dramatic changes in condition evaluation, appraisal ratings, component ratings, that caused us to look again at our algorithm and make an adjustment to it. It's when we realized that we weren't getting good data out of that. Also keep in mind, though, that concurrent to that algorithm, we took a much more granular look at the bridge element conditions. The older elements from the 90s were very broad brush. Of course, you know, quite better than a 0 through 9 rating system. The elements of the 21st century are much more finely detailed and capture a lot more of the defects that, of some of the kinds of which were occurring on Albion.
So that 3.7 or 3, I forget the exact number, but that 3 number from 2014, was that changed in 2016 or?
Yes, sir.
So what would it change back to in 2016?
I think that migrated up to a 4, and our recent inspection post.
I got something in front of me here that someone's trying to show me. It came back to 7. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I can say now that after our rehabilitative work that we've done and the basis of our in-depth inspection, our preliminary indications are going to be that it will be at around the 5 range. 5 is considered to be a satisfactory condition, fair condition, right? If you read the language, it says to the effect that some minor issues, minor deteriorations, so on and so forth, and we believe that to be consistent with the substructure rating.
So, but when it had that 3 rating, wasn't it recommended to replace the bridge?
That was not based, that recommendation was based in, that came in data in 2007. And I want to make clear, you actually touched on something, and I thank you for bringing it to my attention. No one numerical rating, right, is sufficient to drive such a large decision, right? Our Structure Maintenance and Investigations Office does not make sole data-driven decisions. We've been doing this a long time. We have a lot of commentary here. Our engineers bring that to bear in our decision matrix. And while we may look at some of these numerical values, they don't make the decision for us. It's based on a variety of other factors. So I want to make that very clear. Just because it's a 3 doesn't mean it's replaced. A 3 to me means, well, we better do some work on it, or let's see, why is it a 3? Is that a correct 3?
So,
So,
but then the 3 was an algorithm change more than anything else then?
two components, algorithm for one, and also we had different elements, right? Much more granular and finely detailed elements. So we had a more detailed data set by which to work with, and based on the conditions that were input into that data set and our algorithm, it generated that value of 3. We knew something like that was going to happen, and we put that on our bridge inspection reports. And sir, I want to make sure that the community understands that that question coming back just isn't solely related to that bridge here in Albion. We get that question a lot from local bridge owners. What happened? I haven't done any work on my bridge, right? And yet the condition went up, or the condition went down, right? And so we have to make this explanation.
I have a multi-part question. The first is, how many factors in the algorithm are in the subjective range of the current algorithm?
So the algorithm is based on a weighted bridge health index formula, which takes into account the quantities of the defects, right? And their relative weight, and then places them over the entire element. Now, it's very difficult to explain without a chalkboard. I'm an engineer, I don't talk very well in most cases. But the subjectivity becomes much more narrowed with a more granular data set.
Okay, now, did this change the algorithm used in the VA? Or is that algorithm still what it was in 2007?
You talking about the value analysis? When you said
Yes.
VA, but the value analysis is not meant to look at the bridge condition. It looks at the alternatives that are being provided and studied for replacement. So it's a little bit different. The value analysis today looks at all the alternatives and what the...
And applies the same
Did-
standards to all of them and then compares the result.
So what I can say is that in 2007, we were using the original acronym was CORE, commonly recognized elements, right? That was used in our assessments done to that time. And we used the FHWA provided University of Colorado developed translator that translated that element data into component data. Yes, that was used in 2007.
All right, so that was used in 2007, 2014, 15 saw a change, and in 2018, there will be yet another change in the algorithm that is applied to this. And I just need to confirm what Frank said. These are 2 separate algorithms?
Yes, the algorithm that was used prior to July 2014 has been abandoned.
Yeah, no, I mean the one used in the VA, and I'm sorry, but I have read so many pages of Caltrans manuals that refer to the VA that I'm just gonna do that. But there are 2 different algorithms?
I guess I can't speak to the value analysis that you're referring to because I haven't seen it.
Yeah,
I'm afraid
there's
I
not an
can't.
algorithm used in the value analysis. It's a more generalized evaluation, and we can talk to you about it afterward, but it's not an algorithm-driven process.
I guess, to be clear, I can only speak to what's contained in my bridge inspection report. Anything outside of the bridge inspection report is not under the influence of my office.
But in 2018, that algorithm is going to change again.
What I said is that we anticipate a change. We're looking at an improvement of that algorithm, right? That has not yet been decided. What we are considering is the ability for that algorithm to have a direct input, as we cannot develop an algorithm that is absolutely perfect.
I understand.
And our metric assessment from Federal Highway Administration requires that we get pretty darn close to we get pretty good. And we want to, as I said, our endeavor is not to provide anything other than the best data possible. I can say that
What I'm getting at is, it is, 2017, and we're using collectively an algorithm that is about to be outdated. And what effect does that have on the overall assessment when we get to the alternatives analysis? And I must be awfully confused because I saw an algorithm that showed how to do that.
If you're confused, I'm going to accept responsibility for that. I'm not explaining it.
No, you're
good
doing
enough.
fine with your part, that it's with respect to the value analysis.
So in response to your question, we have been stable in our algorithm since July 2015. We are fairly happy with the conversions that it's doing to that single data set. However, we recognize we're not we're not perfect with it, and we want to get better. And so we're going to be looking at ways to make that better. That has not been decided yet. I can tell you that the effect would not be a degradation, but should be an improvement. We're not going to go through a change to make for a worse data set. Right? I'm also going to point out that we spend a lot of time talking about numbers, and the reason why is because numbers are available on the FHWA National Bridge website. We can get them and you can look at them and go, oh my gosh, this bridge is rated a 3 and it's structurally deficient, right? And so it sounds pretty ominous, right? Or this bridge is rated an 8 and it's in great shape. But the fact is that understand that that information and those numbers are derived from an inspection, right? This is a human being, an engineer, making an assessment and digitizing this data. The value and the real information that's contained within, as a result of that inspection, is within the commentary and in the numerical data set. The entire report needs to be examined thoroughly, right? Furthermore, these reports should be compared against the previous report. That's a requirement of the MBIS, that we track defects to the point where they can be reasonably compared so we can track changes. So we can know a bridge in 1980 was in this condition and in 2015 is in this condition, and we do that. So
is the addendum process being driven in part by the change in the algorithm application to this site?
no, ma'am, as I said, the algorithm only applies to what's contained in a bridge inspection report and is not used externally to my knowledge. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Just a question. I'm a bit confused. Maybe you can help me. The numerical weighting of the junction of those timber joints that you referred to is a component in the data set. There are 5,000 of those joints in that bridge. The critical component is the unseen shear ring, and its status as 1010 carbon steel, which is not visible. In a shear moment, if those have degraded, they're subject to moment forces that are quite considerable. The bolts that hold them together fail in tension. That's where they come apart. How the hell do you make an assessment of the most critical component of that joint, give it a data, and then weight it in the algorithm to arrive at your conclusion? I'm very confused.
I'm really glad you asked that question. That's a great So to begin with the condition of the shear rings, Angie's going to show you a picture of it, and I couldn't agree more. Right? There are, in every bridge structure, there are going to be components that are not directly visible for inspection. And in certain cases become very impractical to do destructive testing to be able to determine their condition with a high degree of certainty. In the case of the National Bridge Inspection Standards, right, these are mostly visual inspections. Now, if we have indications based on our visual inspection that we need to look deeper at certain bridge components or certain bridge elements, we will. When it comes to that connection, though, right, now this becomes, you're absolutely correct. A disassembly of that connection affects the integrity of the foundation, or I should say the substructure, right, depending on how we do it. Yes. And so what we do is we base the weighting and the connection defects based on what we see, the visible corrosion of the bolts in that portion of the connection. We have been very vocal, right, that the embedded shear rings, right, that are in each and every one of those timber connections are not available for direct inspection. And we suspect that they are corroded. We suspect that corrosion is underway based on their material and the environment and their exposure. Right? To the degree that they're able to still deliver their design capacity is unknown. However, by inspection, right, the bridge continues to function. We're not seeing any indirect indications of distress, such as wobbling of the joints, right? We're not seeing that the joints are becoming displaced under traffic loads. We're not seeing that there's any obvious crushing or stress-related failures in and around those connections. But sir, we are keeping an eye on it, trust me.
How are you measuring the dimensional shifts? Are they done with strain gauges? Are they done with?
We're not at that degree on that at Albion yet.
You don't know.
Yes, sir, that's correct. Visual inspection only. Right now, the inspection tools that we are using are tape measures, straight edges, and things of that nature.
But that's a, as you know, I mean, this is your business, but that, in a static situation with a compression load, that bridge does fine. In an earthquake, where there's a large vertical component, that's when those joints are going to be stressed. It's when it goes up that it's going to come apart.
I couldn't agree with you more. As a matter of fact, in the seismic retrofit strategy that has been proposed as one of the alternatives, and I spoke with the design engineer about this, he doesn't have a good feel that those shear rings are going to provide the required capacity for the earthquake demand, and so we're going to supplement those. We're going to have to. We're going to sleeve those with an external plate connector to be able to.
Okay, you've gone exactly to where I want to go. Would you help this community understand that when you put supplemental configurations on that bridge to address the unknown and the obvious problem any timber engineer would point out, what this community, I think, needs to know what that supplementary component would look like, because it's going to change the aesthetic continuity of that bridge profoundly, in my personal, and I would like the professional judgment in that matter, so that the people here can understand that, because I don't think that's really understood well.
So I'm going to be clear that the design has not been finalized. But I'm going to also be clear that what I have seen is an external plating, right, over the connections that will be visible. Right? We can't go back inside and disassemble that connection and embed elements in there to be able to restore it, to give it adequate earthquake resistance, right, on the interior, and make it look the way that it looks on the outside, at least to my knowledge. Now, there may be a technique or method that's beyond me at this moment tonight, and we'll be looking at that if we go there. But I can say with some certainty, based on the alternatives that I've seen to provide seismic resistance, it's an external component to the bridge, and you're going to see it. Yeah.
You know, robo bridge.
I'm sorry, Mike, it would be what?
Robo. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? There's somebody over here.
Anne-Marie, go ahead.
It's more of a comment. I have been hearing a lot of the terms structurally deficient and functionally obsolete. And you are putting it in slightly different language. And I understand that even on the webpage got a little new look. And the second sentence here says, this project is needed because the bridge is narrow, it does not meet current standards for shoulders and guardrails, and maintenance costs are high. I like that wording a little better than hearing over and over, it's structurally deficient and functionally obsolete, especially because other organizations, like for example the FHWA, they say functionally obsolete is an obsolete term.
Yes, ma'am.
So I think it would be helpful for us not to keep repeating this. And we have attended meetings of the Mendocino Council of Governments, and they are given that same information. And now we see it on the webpage, and we see their the video on the webpage, and the conclusion was a little different than I remember it. But so if we can just agree to say this bridge, like you said, at this current moment is safe because it changed from 2013 to 2015. We have the information for 2017, and you can tell us we're using these 4 numbers, we're adding them up, and we get this number, and we'll have a 4, and we won't have a 3, and therefore this bridge is good for a while longer. So we don't have to fight in the community whether, you know, it's really awful and it's gonna fall apart the next day, or whether we can use it until we realize it needs more. And in terms of like paint health, we see figures on the peer review fact sheet that it would cost so and so much and has to be repainted every 5 years. Locals haven't seen it repainted every 5 years. So we would just appreciate if the information that Caltrans is putting out there is accurate and not misleading and not leading to the conclusion, oh my God, the sky's falling, we've got to have a new bridge. And we would like to bring a proposal that will be studied when the cost analysis will be studied and the VA study, the final value analysis study report that looks at how can pedestrians be safe? How can bicyclists be safe? And I believe as a community we can come up with creative solutions because I think everybody agrees here that this is important. And when we're talking about the shoulders not being wide enough and a bridge not being wide enough, I don't think the community wants a bridge that's 54 feet wide. That doesn't fit in with the scenery. But if we can come up with an idea with a design where we can accommodate for emergency transportation, for bicycles, for pedestrians, I think we can work with each other. And I appreciate if Caltrans is also listening to the community. We have ears, we have eyes, we live here, we see it, we hear it, we smell it, and we learn a different way maybe than a lot of you who sit in an office, on a desk, and you have your degree and your stamp, and that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
I just got to say, personally, I'm very pleased that there is this level of community interest and involvement into a replacement project, and that I am. I'm a grassroots kind of guy myself, but I'm not here to talk about that. What I can say is, first off, as far as I can remember, the first thing is that I couldn't agree with you more. It's time to stop talking about FO and SD. The term functionally obsolete does not exist in federal law anymore, right? It's an obsolete term. And structurally deficient, while it still exists as a performance measure in FHWA language and federal language, my understanding is that it will obsolete itself. There is an extremely slow administration right now in Washington, D.C., so the progression of that has been not going as fast as my understanding as it should be going. And I think I recommended this to Frank, it's time to stop getting hung up on these monikers, right? Let's just talk about the bridge as it sits. Right? And that is a discourse that I think will alleviate a lot of confusion. Right? And when it comes to needs of the community, the VA study and the community outreach that Frank and his staff are providing is intended to hear you and address those needs. But certainly I'm a career bridge engineer. I've been doing this since I got out of college. I can speak to, and I believe this gentleman can probably support, there's only so much we can do with a 1943 timber bridge in order to address all of its needs with respect to health, with respect to safety, with respect to functional use, and with respect to vulnerability, right?
And safety.
But I will also tell you that when it comes to bridge health, the bridge is safe. That's what we're here for. This is what Andy's here for. This is what our district engineers are here for. The moment that we have any indication that we have a safety issue on the bridge, we set aside our normal work recommendation protocols and we move to emergency protocols and we correct it immediately. We are also empowered by the California Vehicle Code to place an immediate restriction on the bridge. That includes closing it. If we think the bridge is not going to be safe for the traffic that's on it, we're going to restrict it or we're going to close it until we fix it. That's what's going to happen. We don't let them deteriorate to the point to where they're not going to serve the community. And this gentleman here was very concerned about emergency services. You bet. When we talk about the uses of a bridge, we're talking about the ability for fire and first responders to be able to use that bridge when it's needed, perhaps in an extreme event. We want to make sure that that bridge is not on their mind, when they don't stop and look both ways and think about how much load do I have on it before I cross it. Right?
Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, Highway 1 is so narrow that I drive with both hands. And what I don't really understand, and maybe you could help us all understand this, there are miles and miles of Highway 1. I hate to use this word, but would be functionally obsolete if they were.
I thought we were not going to talk about
But I'm just saying, but my point is how, what is the logic in making a bridge so different than the surrounding highway? I don't understand why. I mean, people will hate me for saying this, but every time I see a bicyclist on Highway 1 and I'm driving, it really makes me nervous. I think I've almost gotten a couple of accidents because I'm very impatient. You know, it's horrible. And so I don't understand what good it is making 1,000 feet of Highway 1 terrific. Anyway, maybe you can tell us why.
Well, I'll do my best. I'm not sure it's going to be satisfactory, right? But I'm going to do my best.
Before you do that, Errol, I will say, Alan, we do have a number of projects where we're attempting to get 12-foot lanes, 4-foot shoulders. That's the transportation concept report that Caltrans and Mendocino County have been working on. So we do have a number of projects that have been programmed so that we are looking to widen the shoulders to 4 feet.
All Highway 1?
As much as reasonable. A lot of areas you cannot do because of the
I mean,
topography.
it's fine if you say the laws are saying you have to build this bridge this way, but I just want to tell you that as somebody that lives up here and kind of simple-minded, it does make a whole lot of sense to make such a big bridge with such a small highway. That's all.
They built the same thing when they built the Gold Gate.
So now I'm pretty sure my response is not going to be satisfactory.
Well, I got to say what I wanted.
But the fact of the matter is when we are using federal participation monies in any project, right, there are design standards that are set forth by law. The intent of these design standards is to make the bridge safer, to have a good current bridge, and to have it be able to meet the needs that are anticipated to occur in the future. Not necessarily today, but what's anticipated in the future. And so that's the nutshell answer, but I'm not going to say that design exceptions are not considered, because they are. But it takes a bit of a process to do that.
Can I just say, that can't change, right? I mean, you wouldn't take that under advisement where, I mean, you say the future, I mean, I would bet you a drink that in the next 100 years, they're not going to widen the highway. I mean, I wish I'd be around to collect, or you could collect. But I mean, but would your department or Caltrans hear that as a very serious question, or is that impossible?
I don't think there's anything impossible, and I think that the community outreach that Frank and the staff is providing a forum to hear that. So yes, I'm just going to stop right there.
Mary Rose?
Yeah, given the fact that you designated for the public that the bridge is safe, the issue is the pedestrians and the bicyclists. While you're doing the process of value analysis and getting the money, this is going to be years. Is there a possibility of doing a separate component of a cantilever or something to carry pedestrians and bicyclists safely, now that we know that this process is going to be a long process, but that seems to be what I'm hearing the community say is a safety issue of concern. So can that be addressed sooner than later, and then continue on with the future needs of the bridge?
Right, and those are definitely ideas that would be included in, as part of the value analysis study, those types of enhancements, if you will, for a rehabilitation alternative. They would be evaluated, and that would also be looked at for the other alternatives that are under study.
So that, could that be put as number one rather than the different alternatives? I mean, what I guess I'm trying to extract from this conversation.
Well, in a value analysis study, what's selected is a baseline alternative, and then all the other alternatives are measured against that, and that's what the value analysis study team does. They work together to come to a consensus on what that baseline alternative would be, and then all other alternatives are measured against that, and any enhancements that might be brought to the table for each one of those alternatives are considered.
So that, just for my clarity, is alternative structures and bridges versus a pedestrian safety component. One would be an enhancement and one would be a replacement.
Well, for a rehabilitation alternative, there would be, as part of that, the cantilevered walkway or wider shoulders. In fact, there is right now, under the rehabilitation alternative that was developed by Kevin Harper, wider shoulders that provide for safe pedestrian access, but those are only 6-foot shoulders. But then you get into cost. When you're talking about putting in $24 million to rehabilitate a structure and widen that structure versus the cost of a new structure with the existing lifespan, it's really simple economics. Do you put in $24 million to a project that may only have 20 years of life, because we don't know what is the life of the internal shearing connectors and the timbers, and how much maintenance do you expect to pour into a bridge to keep it safe, versus a new structure that might last 75 to 100 years. It might have a high initial cost, but in the long run, it pencils out economically.
So do you think the temporary fix, say cantilever for pedestrians and bicycles, that would be temporary, would be a cost, of course, but the longer term bridge feature project is going to cost a hell of a lot more and take longer to build. So what do you do in the interim? That's what I'm trying to drive at. You're thinking, what?
Well, that's actually, go ahead.
I'd like to speak to that a little bit. And so, now I'm going to be very frank, I haven't done an extensive analysis on this bridge structure.
Exactly,
right?
that's what it is.
However, the cantilever idea, again, keep in mind that this is a 1943 timber structure, right, with a salvaged steel truss, right, that predates 1943 by at least 20, maybe 25 years, right? Keep in mind, I said earlier, there's only so much one can do, right, to be able to make modifications to make improvements to it. A cantilever sidewalk idea, without getting too technical, a standard AASHTO pedestrian loading is 85 pounds per square foot, right? So let's think about that for a minute. That under a 5-foot wide sidewalk, what is that, about 400 and something pounds, right? For 10 feet long of that 5-foot width, that's about 2 tons, right, of load that has to sustain. That's for 10 feet, right? And so one has to look at the overall structure's load capacity to be able to sustain that additional loading, right? And furthermore, I've always said this, I had a professor once in college that said the bridge is always smarter than you are, right? The structure is always smarter than you are, and I never forgot that, right? The devil's in the details is what I'm trying to get at here. How do we make that happen, right? How do we connect that up to where it actually works and is safe? And the widening concepts that I've seen that Kevin Harper has proposed are not cantilever concepts. They're concepts that involve additional truss lines and additional supporting substructure, because at the preliminary stage, that appears to be the most viable alternative. So also I heard something about someone wanted to look about getting the catwalk opened up. I can't do that, folks. That catwalk is classified as a, don't laugh, I'll explain myself. That's a confined space. Are you familiar with an industrial confined space in that definition? Right? Now, it's not confined in so much as that you're in a cave or a box, right? It's confined in so much as that there is very limited access and egress, right? It's a 1,000 feet long bridge thereabouts, right? So someone getting out on that catwalk 500 feet means that if there's an incident out there, emergency or first responders are going to have to get out there to go take care of that, right? almost certain that Caltrans will not entertain nor support the idea of converting that catwalk into any open pedestrian access. It's just not safe enough. It just won't be. So, as far as an interim project goes, that is on the table.
That also would require updating the bridge rails, of course, the standards, and that's now changed again with MASH. Maybe you can speak to that.
Thank you for going through this, because I think
That's
that's been a concern with the community, and I just haven't been able to extract any other type of.
Let me get John over here first, and then come back to you.
There's another alternate to this pedestrian bikeway problem that people in the community have been talking about for about a month or so. And that's taking that traffic off the bridge completely and taking it down through the campground and across the new pedestrian bridge. The location of the old original circa 1850 bridge that was put there was a lift bridge, a drawbridge that was placed in there in 1850. Taking all that traffic off of the bridge and bringing it down through the campground, across the river on a new bridge, and then up Albion River Southside Road, past the store and back out that way. That would also enhance the coastal trail. It would get pedestrians and bikers over to the side where they could get a great view of the bridge. Before we moved to Albion, we've been across that bridge 20 times and had no idea what it looked like. Because you can't see it unless you go off and look at it. That's one approach that takes the whole issue of the bike path out of this whole, the complex aspect of this whole bridge.
And John, you can bring that to the table with the VA studies since you're on the team.
Yeah, right. Well, I think that's one of the things that makes a lot of sense in terms of.
I'll go here first, and I'll get back to it.
Is the supplemental process,
The supplemental value analysis study?
value analysis, starting with a baseline alternative, or is that still to be identified?
That would be up to the VA study team to select the baseline alternative that all other alternatives would be measured against. Gabrielle?
So I just wanted to point out, one function of the bridge is to go check the ocean conditions. And a lot of the fisher people and folks who spend time on the ocean and make their living on the ocean, you know, what NOAA tells you is the conditions 14 miles out in Mendocino. But the very, very, very local stuff, you know, I drive over the bridge every day just to, you know, look at where the waves are and can I take my kayak out. So I think that's something that the walk down will be a beautiful hike, but one of the functions of the bridge is for people who need to get out in the ocean to know what to expect and is it the right day.
And the coastal trail does run along Highway 1 at this point. Is there another question over here?
No. So, just to kind of finish up, and then if there's no other questions, I'd like Andy to show you guys some pictures. Excuse me. So, you know, getting back to an interim project for widening to, you know, satisfy a need while more studies are performed. Keep in mind that any interim project we do, including the alternatives that are proposed, don't necessarily, they don't actually add a tremendous amount of service life to the bridge, right? The portions that were built in 1943 will still be there. They will still have a demand on them. And while we will ensure to the best of our ability that those portions, when we leave the project at that point in time, are going to meet their design requirement. Right? Keep in mind that the timber portions of that bridge, right, are timber. Now they are treated timber, and they were good timber, likely old growth that we can't get today, right? Fascinating history that the original concrete bridge was denied. Timber was all we could get in World War II. Right? It's widely known that the materials were a poor selection for this harsh marine environment, and this is one of the harshest environments in California by our design criteria. The timbers were treated. They were treated using a method that was developed by an Austrian chemist for mining timbers, right? Subterranean mines. The fact is that the chemicals that were used in that, chromated arsenates, I believe, is the primary component. They do leach out over time, right? They don't stay in there forever. The chromium that was placed in these chemical treatments was placed in there to stabilize it so that it slowed down the leaching process, because before the chromium was placed in there, it would leach out quite fast. And the leaching in this environment, in the fog, rain, normal moisture, even if it was in a drier environment, say in the Sacramento Valley, there's still moisture in the air and it still gets into the fiber, right, like microscopic levels. It still puts these components into, lack of a better term, is osmosis, right? They want to reach some equilibrium. In time, the existing treatment of the existing substructure is going to become ineffective. Right? Now, the original manufacturer of that treatment method probably had a service life prediction in 43 of about 30 years. We've easily doubled that, right? But what we're beginning to see now is the evidence of decay, right? Which is our first indication that we are seeing a ineffectiveness of the biocides that were used, the chromated arsenics that were used to control fungal. We feel that in time, that this will continue to advance. Has anybody ever repaired dry rot on their house? Right? Yeah. You start out here where it looks pretty benign, right? But by the time you get into it, you realize that it has gone much further. Well, I'm not going to say, I don't know with any certainty that that's the case with Albion, but we have evaluated a lot of timber structures, right? This is what we do. We evaluate all structure types throughout California. We're not exclusive, just pre-stressed concrete guys, right? Our engineers are trained to evaluate all these things. And so we know that when decay begins, it can accelerate, and it may not be visible, right, to the visual inspection. You'd have to do destructive testing to be able to find out the extent of it. And now, I can't tell you what the service life of the existing timbers are out there, but I can tell you that in the projection of that in a public forum, we would give it a guarded 20 and maybe less. As years go by and we gain more inspection information, I may revise that figure because I can't predict what remains in the timber and what its effectiveness to decay is going to continue to be as we progress in the future. So I want to make that clear. Also, another thing I wanted to clear up, because I've heard some information that is interesting. We've stated before, and it's a fact, right, that the timber, the steel truss portion of that is classified as fracture critical. Does everybody understand what fracture critical means in bridges? So, okay, so fracture critical is a definition that says that the textbook definition are those bridges with steel elements in tension whose failure of that element would cause a partial or complete collapse of the bridge. Right? Truss bridges, by definition, by Federal Highway Administration, widely accepted, right, are fracture critical bridges. Now, there's a lot that can be said to reduce the amount of, I guess, risk of a fracture critical bridge in terms of internal redundancy, right, load path redundancy. I'm not going to get into all that. But one of the statements I've heard about this is, well, yeah, it's fracture critical, but it's a riveted bridge, right? So riveted bridges are somewhat less susceptible to fatigue cracking, which is really what we're talking about here, crack initiation. To explain what fatigue cracking is, you ever take a coat hanger and bend it back and forth a bunch of times, right, and then it snaps? Well, I guess they're plastic now, but you know, back in my day, they were wire, right? That's kind of what metal fatigue does. Under a cyclic loading, a lot of it, right, eventually it will initiate an internal crack failure and part, right, separate. So while at first blush you can take a look at Albion and say, yeah, it's a riveted truss of that era, the fact is when it was erected and built, welded details, right, were placed on the main tension elements of that truss. And those welded details are categorized by the American Institute for Steel Construction and AASHTO as being highly fatigue prone. We keep a big eye on those. Right? We keep a big eye on those. Hands-on inspections. And he's going to show you some pictures of that. So if you hear terms that the bridge is fracture critical but not very much, no, it's fracture critical. Right? As fracture critical as any other welded steel structure out there.
I'd like to go back to the arsenic. I'd like to go back to the arsenic because for us, it's kind of like the slippery road that Caltrans keeps us on with regards to trying to keep this bridge intact. Every time you take your feet off the ground, you're risking your life crossing the bridge. Anything could happen, you know, it could crash at any moment, given an earthquake, which is so close to the San Andreas Fault. But originally, when Caltrans was criticizing the arsenic leach, the whole idea was it was killing kids. So they wanted to fence it off so that visitor kids who came could like go through a tunnel to get to the beach, but they can't get near the beach lines. As it turns out, one of our community members went looking for information about arsenic poisoning and its presence. Do you want to take it?
No, I don't.
Okay, well, then I'll try.
Right, I can reach from the picture.
Oh, let me read from me. Okay, substance control. What about the toxins in the timbers? A representative from California Department of Toxic Substances Control wrote the following in response to a question by a community member. Quote, arsenic and hexavalent concentrations we have found are higher than what DTSC considers acceptable for a resident. When we estimate risk for a resident, we are assuming a 24-hour, 365-day-year presence. However, since the area of contamination are not a residence, but rather in a recreational setting, we do not necessarily think that there's an issue with current land use. What's more, if the bridge is torn down, its timbers would have to be trucked to a Class 1 hazardous waste facility. The closest such facility is in Petaluma City, 300 miles away. Hundreds of truckloads of toxic waste on local and state roads. Lastly, any discussion of environmental hazards must be also taken into account. The environmental impact must take into account the environmental impact of the proposed new bridge, not only the disposal of the historic bridge, but the impact of construction and geotechnical investigations on the Albion River, a federally designed wild and scenic waterway.
So what's your point?
Is there a question in there?
Yeah.
Well, I think I understand it. I got a bit of a response. Again, it may not be
Stop,
satisfactory.
okay, well, you know what, stop switching excuses, sliding from one to another, anything to waste this bridge and replace it with something else.
Do you mind me to help put that in context? Frank?
Well,
yes.
Introduce yourself too for the group, just so they know that you're here.
Well, first of all, I'm going to respond to part of that because there's been lots of accusations that Caltrans keeps switching from tsunamis to arsenic to the bridge deck, and that's just not true. If you go back and look at the 2009 public meeting, that was not what was talked about with the tsunami. We were asked to go in and actually test the timbers, and we did that. Steve Warner is here, he can speak to that. We have a representative from DTSC here. Steve, you want to come up?
I'm here,
Oh.
Jennifer from DTSC. My name is Debbie, I'm a
Microphone. What is DTSC again?
the California Department of Toxic Substances Control. And we're working on putting together a fact sheet to send to all of you so you understand the results of the investigation. So I'm just here to hear your concerns and incorporate those concerns in the other ones.
Can you please put those facts from Point Marina to
Yes.
us?
And I will.
And also, Beth,
And
we've never
as far
said,
as that here as well.
Beth, we've never said that it's killing kids. I think that's overly dramatic. That's never been said by Caltrans.
What are your fences doing? I mean, your fences were saying, my God, keep your kids away from here. The bridge is leaking arsenic. That's what killed the old lady in the play. Every kid has seen that play.
Frank, one question.
Sure.
What was the lady's name who just spoke?
Ashley Setti?
Ashley Setti?
Let me spell my name for you. I've got business cards in the back as well. I can bring that over to you. My name's Asha Sethi.
Thank you.
Steve, would you like to speak to the studies that were done, the preliminary data and assessment?
Well, the bridge engineer is correct. There's arsenic in timbers, and arsenic is coming off timbers and it's leaching into the soil under the bridge. That's a fact.
But how much?
How much?
Yeah, I mean, does that invalidate what Beth just read?
Well, our study showed that,
Could you use the mic?
the study showed that a casual visitor shouldn't be exposed to too much arsenic. But
And I think there's a difference between what's going into the soil and what's
what's in the timbers themselves. And one thing that I wanted to offer is, I'm a parent. 20 years ago, my kids were little, they were in kindergarten, and if you remember what was going on 20 years ago, maybe you may not be aware, but there were regulations, laws and regulations that came out about treated wood. And so you probably had in your communities about 20 years ago these great playground structures that were made out of treated wood. And when those new regulations came out, they said you can still use treated wood in retaining walls and other places, but you can't use it in a playground any longer. So one of the concerns that we have is that the arsenic is leaching out of the wood. It's onto the cement that supports the wood beneath. And we're worried about people touching that, primarily kids touching it. And kids tend to put their hands in their mouths. And that's why you don't have treated wood play structures anymore, because of the concern about arsenic exposure. And that's why there's discussion about trying to fence it off, because we know, it'd be different if the campground wasn't there, but we know there are children in the campground. We've seen chalk drawings on the supports. We know kids are out there. So that's why we're talking about trying to make it less accessible so that kids can't be touching that and then, like I say, putting their hands in their mouths, which is what little kids do.
Little kids rush to the ocean.
But we saw the chalk drawing, so that's why we're concerned.
I don't mean to interrupt.
It's not just the human kids. People eat the crabs out of the river, the fish, the seaweed gatherers.
And eating it for 30 years.
Exactly, and a lot of, I've never seen so much cancer as I have since I've been up here.
So we can't stay off the Albion River.
Okay, but hang on.
Can you remember that it's not just the human kids?
And they're looking at these other things as well. But the levels that we're seeing in the sand was definitely elevated, but not that high. What we were really mostly concerned about was the tactile issue on the cement and the timbers.
It's not that high to wash it out into the ocean, but the ocean,
Yeah,
there
it's
is no way.
and we understand.
And it's also true, correct, that elevated levels of arsenic have not been found in groundwater or in areas a larger distance away from the bridge itself.
And you can speak
So
more.
concerns about
We did
seaweed
find it
and
one
fish.
sample. The thing is, it's sand, and it's a very
Yeah.
dynamic environment, and it goes into the water very quickly. And it's very hard to find. I mean, we know it is. I went under the bridge with a bottle and took a sample of the water coming off the bridge when it rained, and it's got arsenic in it. We know it goes into the ground. We know it goes into the groundwater. It's very hard to find it. You have to be at the very right time, when it's raining, when the tide is doing the right thing to get a sample and find the arsenic. But it is coming off the bridge, it's coming out of the timbers, and it's going into the environment. And the screening levels of arsenic in the environment are above screening levels.
To me,
or the ecological health of the environment.
to me, it's very hard to find, means we haven't found any.
Well, we have found it.
At what ppm?
Not at a significant distance from the bridge, though, or in the groundwater.
At what ppm?
Actually,
I know I'm not conducting this meeting. This gentleman he's been raising his hand for quite some time. Yeah, that's you.
I'm neither whom you refer. First off, you're referring, of course, to the Volma process. And
The only two mentions of the type of preservative that we've been able to find in the bridge work are yes.
well, the Volma process is what you're referring to. It's a vacuum impregnation process under heat. Whenever there's steam, you have a vacuum. If you've got a lumber mill, you've got steam. Ergo, the Volma process, which is why I raised that issue and a long time ago and received all the arrows appropriate to that. The point is that the de minimis concentrations that you're referring to of that process, which contains not just heavy metals and the form of insecticides and the arsenic, but some cadmium and some chromium, but it's not the hexavalent chromium that DTSC found is from pigment yellow 65. That's the traffic yellow line that goes down the road. It's not in the Volman process. It's not a part of the constituency of that compound. It was it was cat hair. And also, there was a lot of phenols in it to essentially get the cross-linking that you're referring to, that gave it a permeable depth of about 1/2 inch. I'm coming to the question. That 1/2 inch is the outer surface of which is exposed to sunlight, ultraviolet degradation, all the dissociation thresholds associated with that. That's why it washes off in the rain. It doesn't accumulate in the sand, as you folks have found, because of the percolation rates. It just goes quickly into the water or in those areas where it accumulates over time. The question is the checking of the timbers. It's the checking of the timbers where the Volman process fails that joint. It's a nice feature to have intumescent. The thing isn't going to burn very well. It'll put itself out because of all those phenols. But it's the checking that goes into those joints that concern me about those shear rings. And I would suggest perhaps you might want to help people understand why that's so important. The Volman process keeps the bugs at bay, but it's not going to keep rust, which never sleeps.
That's very true. And you do bring up something that I was going to mention and that we're continuing to address. You're absolutely correct. Any type of treatment process, right, typically treats the perimeter of a member, and they're intended to be a biocide, right, to prevent fungal decay, which is essentially kind of like a plant, right, or insect infestation, termites. So different chemicals are put in there, and the stability enhancers are placed in there to keep them stable and so on and so forth. But you're quite correct. Clear penetration through the center of an element, particularly using steam vacuum methods, was not possible. Timbers of this size, there are certain smaller elements that one may be able to make an argument that you'll get sufficient penetration, 2x4, so on and so forth. We know, though, that when we do open up and expose the interior of a timber element to the environment, and all I mean by the environment is air and moisture, water, two things that a plant needs to grow, that will activate the spores that are inherent, right, in the interior of all timber elements, and they'll start to decay. The checking that you mentioned, absolutely. And we're filling the checking up right now with epoxy to be able to try to arrest and slow down that egress of the most obvious areas. Any type of penetration, including bolted connections on timber ends, oh boy, you bet. We are keeping a close eye on that. So you mentioned the shear rings. Not only are the shear rings something that we're keeping an eye on, we're keeping an overall look at the overall condition of the timber ends, right? The column ends. Andy's going to show you some pictures of what an open end of a timber element exposed to the environment does in time. Keep in mind that sawn timber, you can think of it as kind of like a bundle of straws, right? The way that it's constructed and it's on its microscopic scale. And so those straws will allow, while they're very strong, right, and resist certain loads, they're open at the end, and that opening allows water to get in. And I don't mean just like pouring water, I mean water vapor, right, or molecules will migrate in there and will initiate decay. So you're absolutely correct, sir. The checking is going to bypass or diminish the effectiveness of any type of biocide treatment that's placed in the timbers. And furthermore, the bolted connections and timber ends that may or may not be untreated is going to be another avenue by which it will give rise to proper conditions or the needed conditions that may give rise to decay. And we're keeping an eye on that. So I say that any of the alternatives that we're studying, right, we make improvements, right, we're still going to have that old timber bridge at the heart of this thing. And we're going to deal with it. If we don't deal with it today, or in a decade, or in 20 years, we're still going to deal with this thing. It may be our children that deal with it, but it's still going to have to be looked at, right? We're still going to have to address it.
Go ahead, Dan.
This goes back to the internal shear rings that you were talking to Mike about earlier. And I understand that that's a real problem because you can't see what the problem is. And you had said that there is a potential solution with something that was external. And I didn't quite understand what you were saying, but you explained it better than I'd heard before.
So this is only to address seismic vulnerability, right? The idea of enhancing seismic performance is making sure that the bridge on top, the big heavy part on top, can move around, and that load gets transmitted down to the foundation and into the earth without any failure right in that path. So, you know, as this gentleman, what was your name, sir?
Mike.
Mike. As Mike pointed out, right, as this thing goes through an earthquake force, tremendous stresses are going to be generated on these timber connections. And the design engineer and maintenance engineers, we can't assess those with a high degree of certainty. And so the supplement for seismic performance is to ensure that that connection is going to remain intact by supplementing it, right, with something that's going to be stronger than what's in there. In other words, we're just going to ignore what's ever on the inside. And we're going to put something on the outside that we know is going to work.
We've been hearing about that for 3 or maybe 4 or 5 years now, that those internal shear rings are the big problem. And this is the first time I've actually heard that there's a potential solution for a seismic retrofit.
So understanding that there is a solution for the retrofit, that doesn't mean it's going to address the continued degradation and decay of those connections internally. Right?
But if you're putting an external fix, you are saying that that's overriding the internal connections.
I didn't necessarily say that, not under all load conditions, only under that condition for seismic performance.
So if it's an earthquake, it's going to, you know.
And Dan, Kevin Harper did explain that when he was here, and on the website there is a rehabilitation alternative that shows those connectors.
So Kevin's rehabilitation alternative that with the connectors for seismic performance, they weren't designed to enhance or prolong the service life of the timber columns, right? They were only to be provided for seismic performance. Just to make that clear. Okay?
So in the 80s and 90s, when a seismic retrofit was proposed, was that part of the proposal for a seismic retrofit at that time?
That's a real good question, because the seismic retrofit program has been continuing to evolve since the San Fernando earthquake, right, 1972. We learn a lot from our last earthquakes, and it redefines our seismic performance criteria and our evaluation criteria. So we underwent a retrofit program in the 70s and 80s. After Loma Prieta, we underwent a tremendous retrofit program, right? You drive around the state highways, you see steel columns on concrete bridges that have been encased in steel shells, things like that. Okay? We continue to rescreen our existing structures, particularly those that have not yet been retrofit, to be able to determine their vulnerability. And so a screening process that may have been in place in the 70s or 80s is not the same process that's in place today. Right? We learn more about vulnerability, we learn more about seismic performance, and we learn more about structural response to that. And so we judge our screening criteria based on the best information that we have today. And to tell the truth, I'll be honest, you know, a bridge project may take several years. And so we may enter into a bridge project with a seismic evaluation of X. And when we evolve and get our way through the design process, right, we find that when we're getting ready to go to design or build, now the performance criteria is Y. Right? It can occur that quickly. So I just want to make that clear. We could, our seismic engineers do reevaluate and rescreen on a continuum. And Albion, while not captured in screenings in the early years, was most certainly identified in 2004, I think, yeah, as being requiring a hard look. And when we give it a hard look, our project, the way that our projects are developed says that, okay, so we identified it as a vulnerability, and that means that when one goes to do a fairly significant amount of work on the bridge, seismic vulnerability needs to be addressed. Right? That's kind of where we are.
John Johansson's got a question here. John?
Can't you just take 4 or 5 of those split ring conditions and X-ray them and determine the condition of that split ring?
We have not considered any non-destructive testing techniques to be able to determine the condition. That is X-ray techniques. I would have to take a look and see the feasibility of that. That is the power of the X-ray, right? Keep in mind that's an X-ray, right? That's a gamma ray. So there's a hazard associated with it in the practicality, and also the effectiveness, right? X-ray technology on human beings is quite advanced. X-ray technology on structures, maybe not quite so much. And I don't want to get too far out of my wheelhouse here, but I will answer your question and say we haven't looked at that as an alternative for making an assessment of those.
Because I agree with Mike that that split ring is a critical aspect. If those are deteriorating, those joints are going to fail. And I think it's probably worth taking a look at that.
Trust me, all of these things that you're identifying in this meeting, right, are not lost upon us. So when we make a decision to make a recommendation, right, we look at all of these aspects, right? We know that we have a timber substructure that is going to continue to decay over time, and there's not much we can do about that, right? We know that we have portions and connections of that timber substructure that are suspect, that we can't assess with a high degree of certainty, right? We know the bridge is seismically vulnerable. We know it's got functional issues, right? Based on 1970s formula, whether or not those formula are applicable to your community, I can speak to, but based on formula that we use to make these assessments, right, it has a deficiency there. We know that we have a fracture critical bridge, right? We know that we have a bridge rail, and I think I want to talk a little bit about that timber rail.
Pretty bad. Well, before you go on, may I ask a question about seismicity?
Yes, we'll go ahead and just wrap it up and do a presentation. So Norman, go ahead.
What is Caltrans's design event and peak instantaneous acceleration for this area of the Albion Bridge?
You got me on that one. I'm afraid that I don't have that information in front of me right now. But Kevin Harper can provide that, and we'll make that available to you.
Right, because unless you can put that into the record, speaking about seismic vulnerability is really a high aspect.
That is in the record, and Kevin Harper did take that into account in his design. Andy, you want to?
Yeah, I was just saying I was going to address that a little bit when I go through the report.
So I've been talking a long time. I'm out of water. Not that I can't get more water, but I want to make sure that I answered a lot of your questions. Does anybody have any other questions? Right? Was I able to provide a little clarity to some of these questions that have been on record for a while? Did I do my job well enough for you? Thank you. Make sure that we are a transparent organization. Nobody here is trying to hoodwink anybody to make a decision. As a matter of fact, my office looks at bridge replacement as being a very, very dire is a wrong term. That's a big decision, right? We look at all available alternatives for rehabilitation, reconstruction, right? All these things are considered in lieu of bridge replacement until as it becomes a question of just economic sense. When you pile all this stuff up, right? Which way do you go? I give an analogy, and then I'm going to stop talking and let Andy talk, right? You got an old car. You may love that old car, and it has served you quite well for a long time, but it requires a lot of repair. It's starting to rust out, and the brakes aren't so good, and so on and so forth. How far do you go before you decide you need a new one? Well, that's kind of the decision matrix that we make, and I'm not going to discount any of the humanistic or cultural aspects of the structure. We'll say that when we make these decisions, we're engineers, right? And we make them based on scientific and fact and economic analysis. There is a lot of other things that go into decisions like this, and Frank's doing a fine job in trying to get to address those concerns. Anyway.
One more thing. It's a plea to do the seismic retrofit. The seismic retrofit has been talked about before the Giants played the A's. It was talked about in Northridge, and the solutions have been that it's cheaper to build a new bridge than it is to do a seismic retrofit. It was said that it was a wooden bridge. It didn't need seismic retrofit. There's been a dozen different reasons why Albion hasn't had seismic retrofit. 2 years ago, there was talk of doing the retrofit, but it became an interim seismic retrofit. And they shored up the metal section with concrete pillars, and that was great. You could see the difference that made. But it was only that one little area. So now maybe the metal section's not going to fall to the ground in an earthquake. But now from what I've heard from Mike and others, that those internal shear rings, they could very well fail and an earthquake if that bridge goes up and comes back down. And if there's a solution for that, my God, how can you in any conscience not do a seismic retrofit?
Our proposal, I believe, sir, is to include, to address the seismic vulnerability.
They've been talking about that since the 80s. For that particular bridge, they had 5,000 bridges in, what year was that, Lowell Theater? Was that 87?
1989.
There was 5,000 California bridges, 4,900 and plus were seismic retrofitted. The Albion Bridge was not.
I could go ahead and add that not only Albion was not after 1989, but a bunch of other bridges in California were after 1994. A bunch more were added, right? Because we learned from the 94 Northridge earthquake, right? And we also commissioned some of our best research institutions in California to study the problem and give us better guidance than we were seeking prior to those events. And we still continue to do
Is
that.
part of that a value analytics saying it's cheaper to build a new bridge than it is a seismic retrofit?
It isn't just the seismic retrofit.
No, Kathy, it's not exactly
It's
only, but
the sharing.
But if there is an earthquake tomorrow, the bridge could very well fall because it didn't get a seismic retrofit. That's the difference. The timbers may fail. We don't know, you don't know. But if there is an earthquake tomorrow and one of those, how many of those internal connectors are, if one of those fail, that could very well make the whole bridge fall. Is that true or not?
A single, I really can't, you know, that's a difficult question for me to ask up here on the balls of my feet in front of a public meeting. And so, you know, in respect of your question, I'm going to say that I guess I don't know enough to be able to answer that with certainty, and I'm going to stop. What I'm going to tell you is that we know we have a weak point in the substructure that needs attention to resist seismic forces, and that we seek to address that overall vulnerability with a rehabilitation or replacement project. So, but whether to say that it's too expensive to retrofit a bridge, no way. These are Californians. Folks, my family drives on these roads just like yours. There's no way that we're going to make any decisions, right, that are going to be biased toward any community. We're all Californians. We all use this infrastructure. We all deserve to have the best and the safest infrastructure out there.
When could that happen? When will it happen?
We're under study right now. I think we have to go through the appropriate public forums to be able to address that. We've got our VA study. We have a supplemental VA study to involve members of the community to be able to make the appropriate decision. We're going to proceed forward with something. That's a fact, right?
Another 20 years?
Well, sir.
Well, we keep getting stopped and roadblocked, and if you allow the process to go forward and allow the studies to move forward, then we'll get to that point whether or not it's the decision to be made. That's what
So it's our fault. So it's our fault.
No, I'm just saying, allow the process to go forward.
But Frank, 5 years from now, best case scenario, you get a new bridge built. But you're gambling that for 5 years, there won't be an earthquake to take out that bridge.
There are still laws you have to study, each alternative. You can't just pick one and go with it.
Oh, I'm not talking about alternatives, I'm talking about seismic retrofit.
That is an alternative. Seismic retrofitting the bridge right now is an alternative. It's a rehabilitation alternative.
Hasn't that been mandated by California or federal?
It's a rehabilitation alternative.
Hasn't it been mandated?
Oh, we don't have, I mean, it is a historic structure. I don't know if Kendall wants to speak to that, but any work you do in a historic structure, you do have to go through SHPO, is that correct?
Right. Yeah, and a seismic retrofit, like what he's talking about, would have visual impacts to the bridge that would probably be adverse.
And you would have to conduct environmental, pardon me?
I guess you should have done it 15 years ago when it first came up, then.
Okay, we're going to keep going. Quick question, Mary Rose, and we're running out of time already. We're looking at 35 minutes, and Andy's got some...
So I just want to make clear that seismic retrofit is an alternative rather than a priority to do a temporary fix while you figure out what the future replacement would be.
The rehabilitation of the existing bridge is an alternative.
But it's not an emergency fix like, you know, it's equal to this replacement as an alternative, and I'm asking, is there something that's gonna mitigate something, from happening sooner, like if a seismic?
Well, the most recent work that was done, that was extending the seed extenders, addresses the most vulnerable.
That's correct.
Event.
So you are looking for that and mitigating that right now,
What's that, Maris?
for seismic retrofit as it?
That is, the seismic retrofit is part of the rehabilitation alternative. That's one of the alternatives under study right now.
So meaning nothing else is being done for seismic retrofit unless you choose that alternative or another alternative. So either way, we have to wait for some type of seismic retrofit. Is that what you're
I
saying?
don't think she was understanding the interim project that was just completed.
Yeah, because you're mentioning alternative versus a seismic retrofit.
Well, we just completed a project, that was we did an interim seismic retrofit. That was addressing the most vulnerable aspect of the drop-off from the truss, steel truss, and that was to extend the seat extenders.
That's correct. So, you know, in the interest of time, I don't want to cut anybody off here.
Because we need to bring that up because it was missing from the conversation. Thanks for answering.
Andy is our senior engineer responsible for inspection in District 1. Andy recently spent 3-4 days performing an in-depth inspection of Albion. He's got the results of that inspection. They're being drafted right now by our bridge maintenance engineer responsible for that structure. But Andy's got a lot of photographs he took. He thought it might be helpful and useful for you to take a look and see what this thing looks like kind of up close. And so, if you guys are done with me, it's time to listen to Andy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present our findings from the last inspection. The purpose of the inspection on October 11th was to basically assess and just assess the condition of the bridge after the recent contract that was completed where we did the seat extenders and the replacement of the bolts in the substructure, or most of the bolts. I want to reiterate what Errol said, that our job is to make sure the bridges are safe. You know, we don't go out to a bridge and leave a bridge if it is unsafe. So I want you guys all to feel comfortable that you know, you are driving over a bridge that can carry your car and your family and all that. But I do want to say, and this addresses this gentleman a little bit, is that when we go to a bridge, we're basically assessing it for the as-built conditions. We're not looking at a bridge to see if it meets current standards, current codes. If that was the case, we would probably be closing a lot of bridges, you know, honestly. So, you know, everybody doesn't want to talk about the timber bridge rail, but, you know, since I'm looking at it from an as-built condition, the timber bridge rail is actually good condition. I'm not talking about crash worthiness or anything like that, okay? I also wanted to talk a little bit about just going over what Errol had talked about with the appraisal codes, and that seems to be a real hot topic. I'm not sure if everybody quite gets it. The appraisal codes, in a nutshell, are just to basically prioritize bridges for, you know, funding, right? That's what you know, the functionally obsolete. You know, we said we weren't going to talk about functional obsolescence, but the structural deficiencies and all that, and the appraisal codes and the sufficiency ratings. That's just to basically put it in line to make it eligible for money from the federal government. And the algorithms that Errol was talking about, and try to simplify that, we went to the element level inspection. So we have all of these different elements. We broke up the bridge into different elements, and then we put it into a computer, and it spits out that one number, whether it's the deck, the superstructure, or the substructure appraisal rating. I just wanted to try to clear up that a little bit. This lady was talking about subjectivity. The whole purpose of that algorithm is to try to take, you know, objectivity out of the equation, to try to make it fair. And you were talking about the VA, I know, but I wanted to address it.
Just so I can understand, you said that it was used for priority, and my question is it really a priority compared to other bridges, or is it eligibility for the funding?
Eligibility, you're correct. Can you bring up, I didn't want to bring up an actual bridge report, I didn't want to put people to sleep, but could you bring one up again?
Sure. I'll find one here.
While you're doing that, I just wanted to talk about the sufficiency rating, which is kind of insane when you look how much it swings from 2013, from 63.9, then it goes to 15.3, then it goes to 53.2, and if you go on the National Bridges webpage, it's 78 point something or other. And so it's really crazy making to keep track of these ratings, which are really not helpful other than for funding. Is that what you're saying? So
That
can we just
sufficiency rating
throw
is-
that out too, just along with the functionally obsolete?
Well, the sufficiency rating basically, if it's below 80, it's eligible for rehab funds, and if it's below 50, it's eligible for replacement funds. There's a lot of data that goes into calculating that sufficiency rating. I don't know if you've looked at, all of the data that we gather to put in these bridge reports. I looked at it this morning just to kind of refresh myself on it again. There's so many items that get weighted different ways, and if it's over this number, then you can use this deduction. It's really very complicated, but it's the system that we've had. So yes, when data changes, the sufficiency rating will change. So, but yeah, it's again, it's trying to prioritize where the money goes.
And there's money for federal bridges. I haven't heard, how much and where and how, and maybe that can be a topic for some other meetings, but I would like to know what money there is out there for historic bridges. That's what I meant to say.
I just wanted to speak, it's not a federal bridge, these are federal monies that are made available to the states to use to improve infrastructure as part of the bridge program. And so those terms really are antiquated because there is a whole new criteria for allocating funds for infrastructure improvements that started with MAP 21 and expanded with the FAST Act. So while Andy's correct, there is a lot of variables that go into that. The SR, again, is a numerical component that determines eligibility and a level of eligibility for federal funds. Within our office, while we may look at SR as one piece of data, again, I'm going to reiterate, it is not a sole piece of data that drives any single decision.
Yeah, I'm just generally interested in money that's available for historic bridges. And that can be a topic for some other.
That will have to be, kind of outside of my little house on that one.
Yeah.
Can I get a hand to move this down? Thanks. Thank you. Could you scroll up to the top? There you go. So my staff are the boots on the ground. They're the guys that put their hands on the bridges. So I'm gonna have more of a nuts and bolts approach to this. So just forgive me. Like I said, I did not want to bring this up, especially this late. But this is just information on the bridge, the structure description, year built. We just scroll down. We're gonna get down to the load capacity information right here. And this is what I wanted to talk to this gentleman's, or speak to this gentleman's question. This is basically based only on vertical loads. We do not talk about seismic or anything like this. These capacities, we basically establish an inventory and operating rating and make sure it's good for legal trucks, permit trucks, and again, it's only vertical, live and dead load, no lateral, hydraulic, seismic, ice loads, wind loads, whatever. Well, we actually will consider hydraulic if there's a scour vulnerability for a bridge. We will consider hydraulic loads on it. We get our hydraulics people involved with that. More general description of the bridge. Go ahead and talks about the bridge rail. Go ahead and scroll down a little more, please. There's that notice that Errol was talking about. Now we get into the inspection commentary. This is basically talks about how we access the bridge. what equipment we used, who helped us do it, if the bridge crew gave us traffic lane closure or whatever. This is a very complicated bridge to access, so the scope and access is very long. Let's scroll down a little bit more. Got a little bit of history in here, miscellaneous. So we talked about our safe load capacity again. Okay, this is what I was trying to get to and talk about the appraisal ratings and how this affects it. So this is the deck element and all the sub-elements that go through it. Try and go through this quick just to give you just a general overview. Go ahead and scroll on here. I'm not going to make you stop. Just keep on going. There's a lot of elements in this bridge. Go ahead.
Before you go on, how much deferred maintenance has Caltrans allocated to this bridge?
Deferred maintenance, could you define that?
Unfunded, identified by field staff, by management, by headquarters, but just unfunded work that was recommended somewhere up the chain of command, but was not implemented.
It's in this report, actually. So when we scroll down, you can actually see that. So we continue, we've got column elements, substructure elements, joint elements, bearings, the truss timbers, floor beams, keep on going. So okay, we can stop here. This is our work recommendations. There's 2014, we have 2011. Some of it's been initiated. All the information in here is, if we thought we needed to make a work recommendation, it's in here.
And Andy, right here, this is where we see the statement about the timber plank deck appears to have reached the end of its service life. And that just was based on the cracking and the raveling the pavement. And of course, the recommendation by the district to go in and replace that. But before that occurred, we went ahead and had maintenance go out and just take some core samples to determine what the actual condition of the deck was. There's a lot of talk going around that we were trying to scare folks that the deck was basically in need of a replacement. And it's not the case. This report was out and provided to the community.
Okay. Once we get through this and I get to actual presentations that I wanted to show the people, and we can talk about the actual condition of the deck as it is right now. So we have a lot of work recommendations. And then so to go on back down the last page right there. So all of that element data that you saw beforehand, the computer algorithm that Errol was talking about, basically takes all that data and spits out these single numbers. And then, so that's why it's not a perfect system and that we've been having to tweak it. And so I just wanted to clear that up a little bit. So go ahead and close this out, and then there's a file in there called just, I think it's dated 2017, 10/11 photos.
Okay.
And while that's coming up, I don't think that entire report is available on the web, at least to the public part.
You guys are privy to this. I think formally we would actually have people make a public records request. So yeah, you kind of were a little privileged to see that. I'm not sure how we're doing that.
I think the 2015, is that on your website, Frank?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, the 2015.
This was the 2016,
The whole thing?
3/24/16.
I can't speak to what's on there. But,
I believe it's the 2015.
If you could post the 3/24/16.
That was an older report.
This was only as an example, right?
I just used it as an example to just kind of give you an idea of what we're producing.
Robert, we have, the better we understand what it is you're working with, the easier it is to figure out how we can be supportive of the solution.
I get that. That's why I wanted to kind of go through what we're going through.
And thank you.
So that report that was shown is not necessarily.
Yeah, that's me.
Any particular one you want to show?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. It was, it's a PDF file.
Okay.
I brought the 360-degree files just in case, we needed to look at a specific part of the bridge.
Robert, on The consultant, Dr. Astanay, filed California Public Records Acts and got copies of all of every single maintenance record dating back to 1944.
But it didn't appear to include this one.
Oh, I don't know.
I'm not aware that it included the 3/24/2016 one. That's why I was asking about that particular one.
Good point.
Okay, so, again, nuts and bolts, just trying to give you, bringing the information that me and my staff member got from the field. I just wanted to show you pictures. They don't really look like they're showing up too good. So, anyway, it is what it is. We just take photos of stuff that we see and that we're going to report on. This isn't very important. We can scroll back. It's just a broken utility pipe that's on the side of the bridge. You might want to scroll out a little bit. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that'd be good. Again, you can't really see it, but this is really rusted. So we just keep on going.
Can you explain what that is?
It's a utility pipe attached to the side of the bridge.
Whose utility pipe?
Whose utility pipe?
That probably is in the BIR, or at least in the database. I don't know. Is it abandoned? Well, there's one it's broken, so that makes sense.
Or else the utility would have fixed it.
Yeah.
So that was a water pipe that was put on the bridge in '43 to connect the water from the south side of the river to the north side of the river, and it was never completed.
Wow. I'm kind of amazed because sitting here, I've actually learned a lot about the history about the area. You know, in my job, I get focused on the bridge, and I'm just sitting, I didn't know that. It's kind of crazy stuff. All right, so this is a picture of, and I have some attachments on some of these. I'm not sure if you can see them on there, but this is a picture of underneath the deck. So this is a picture of, it's not showing up all the way. If you go to 100%, that little thing there. So you just double click it.
What is it showing?
Yeah, that's why I have the attachment, because some of these pictures, there's not a lot of reference. Okay, so this is a cross section of the bridge. This is the bridge rails. That's the roadway. We're looking up underneath like this. You can close that out. Sorry, Frank.
Okay, same.
Okay, sorry. I thought I was going to have access to myself. So. Okay, so basically what we're showing here is that there's the initiation of decay. So we have some white fungus growing on this. Let me say right now that anything that I show you, again, you should not be alarmed, because we don't close bridges that are safe. You might see something that at first might go, what the? But it's not horrible. We're just documenting unemotionally the condition of the bridge. So white fungus, normal on the underside of timber, because the water leaks through the AC, the asphalt, and then starts to grow this white fungus. Initiation of decay.
Can that be scraped off or washed off?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you can really, if you get to it quickly enough, you might be able to put some kind of a herbicide. This guy.
I can speak to that. So, any type of, sorry about that. It's on? Is it on? Okay, sorry. The cleaning of that, yeah, sure, you can get that off there. It's almost certainly to come back. Right? A mold or a stain is inherent. It lives in the element. And really right now, molds and stains are not classified as a deleterious effect. It's not like a fungus, right, that gets in there. So determining what species it is and its effects on the structure is something that we're looking at. What Abby is making the point of is that we have a photographic documentation, right, up close. When we say we have this condition, right, it's backed up by a picture. That's in the record. That's on top of the engineer who signed and stamped the report saying, I have this condition. These are all, they're documents that are not intended necessarily for open public viewing, but they're certainly suitable for it. We use these documents internally, right? If
Vandy's engineer comes to us and say, hey, I think I got a problem with that bridge, we say, well, prove it. What problem do you have, right? And he brings us this data. So in any case, get back
Thank
in.
you, and just to follow up on that, when was the last time the bridge was painted?
I'm not sure. I'll have to look that up, I'm sorry, I don't know.
Ballpark,
2 years, in the last couple of years. It was
Frank, do you
probably 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Still, that particular
2013, I
issue.
believe, 14.
Well, the paint condition looks pretty darn good.
It's not bad, it's, yeah.
So I would say it would be recently, within the last 5 to 10 years maybe?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
It was done 3 years ago.
I gotta do better homework before I come to these meetings.
The only thing on that bridge that's ever been painted is that steel truss. None of that wood has ever been painted.
That's because, and that's very true, it's because the surface coating of timber, right, is not effective, right? My house is painted, but it doesn't stop the decay from getting in there, right? It's herbicides, biocides that control that.
But when we talk about painting the bridge, everybody looks, painting the bridge, oh, God, that's terrible. Well, that's not as much of a cost as you think, it's the part, it's
Oh, you're absolutely correct. A paint is not necessarily a decorative function on a bridge, right? We're engineers.
so it's a protective.
It's a protective coating, that's correct.
Right.
It's there to protect the bridge against corrosion. And in a marine environment like this, very important.
Infiltration of moisture, presumably infiltration of moisture and other damaging.
It's to provide a chemical barrier or a chemical countermeasure, right, to the I'm not gonna get into that, right? It's there to stop the bridge from rusting. How's that for keeping it simple?
Well, it's sealing the wood.
Well, as far as the timber goes, the sealant of the wood, understand that timbers, and I'm not gonna really take too much away from this, but timbers shrink and swell, right, a lot. Right? That's one of the inherent things of the material. With moisture content, they do not remain dimensionally stable. So coatings, water coatings will bridge that, older coatings will not. Right? So a protective coating to protect moisture intrusion, while that may extend or inhibit moisture intrusion, you have to understand that some paint coatings do allow moisture vapor at a molecular level to penetrate and still get in, correct? And also those portions that we can't get to, right? Or that may open up, right, we can't paint, are still available for moisture intrusion to happen. And again, I'm not talking about pouring water out of a pitcher here, guys. You gotta think about molecules floating into the
I
thing.
don't think anybody wants that bridge painted.
Well, just to speak to that, what I heard was there was an appearance thing, and I think I kind of ran it now, so I'm gonna
Is the question about the steel portion, about it being painted, because I don't think SM&I has ever recommended to paint the timber.
The railing is.
Yeah, I believe the timber has been, the timber rail has been painted.
Well, that's for visibility,
Yeah.
right? That's for safety.
What's this picture?
Yeah, they're not showing up as good as I thought. Is there another attachment up there on one of those other timber deck ones? So,
Photo 9 was actually very descriptive.
could you go up a little bit? Yeah, there was another one. These dark ones here are actually a wide angle, not that one, a little further, I'm sorry. Could you stop right here? These pictures are actually more wide angle. Frank can probably see them of a wider view of the girders and the bottom side of the deck. The water staining and the fungus is in large areas on the bottom of the deck. Okay, and
If you stop at photo 9 for a moment, if you would please.
yeah, that's where I'd like that my attachment to.
So the question is, how does it happen that a deck drain, which is an integral part of the bridge structure, is allowed to clog or in some manner not function so that the timber adjacent to that drain rots?
In an ideal world, the deck drains would be cleared, correct?
But that's, as all of us know from the gutters around our houses, that's a primary function of maintenance of any structure.
What's your point?
The point is, to the extent that the algorithm shows deck decay, how much of that is actually a function of that part of the bridge not being regularly and completely maintained? And do we need to boost the maintenance budget to get that done.
Oh, I would be all for a boost to the maintenance budget. having, you know, working for maintenance, but, yeah, the bridge crews are taxed heavily. And they do the best that they can with the inventory that they have to maintain. Sometimes, yes, deck drains get clogged, and that's just life. You know, you can't fight entropy. So, but yeah, you are correct. I mean, and what you're seeing there, these pictures we're looking this way. You caught that, so you can close this out. I'm just trying to give people a reference on this.
You know, it took us 6 years to get the speed limit on the bridge changed from 50 miles an hour to 35. And when they finally reduced the speed, they put it right smack at the bridge instead of allowing people to know that you've got to slow down a little bit ahead, because it's 50 miles an hour, about an eighth mile away.
That's not a change in the speed limit, that's an advisory with a radar feedback sign, and that was the location that traffic safety selected.
That's not a speed limit?
That's not a speed limit, that's an advisory. Yeah, it's still 55 miles an hour except north of the bridge, and it's 50 miles an hour speed limit.
Well, why
But-
is it so nuts like that, Frank?
Pardon me?
Why is, I mean, that is nuts.
Well, we had CHP here explaining what speed zoning is about, and I think that the explanation that was given was based on what the 85th percentile for drivers along that section of highway is. And we could have them back again, but I'm sure you wouldn't want them to come here, right?
Does the speed limit somehow relate to what I'm presenting?
The speed limit relates to the deterioration of the deck. The faster you go over what becomes potholes and stuff, the more damage.
No, I think this is a wet, dry environment because, as someone pointed out, the deck drains get clogged.
No, I'm not talking about the picture.
Okay, well, we're running out of time. We've got
I'm talking about excuses.
about 10 minutes, and then we're going to close it down because we said 8:30. John?
At the beginning of your presentation, Andy, you mentioned that part of what you were doing a couple of weeks ago was inspecting the condition after the recent project that took place for the seismic and the bolts. In your presentation, you said most of the bolts were replaced, and I don't think that's the case.
The last
Do you know
project,
how
there
many
was
bolts were replaced?
816 bolts were replaced in this last project.
816,
That's correct.
out of how many?
Not all the bolts have been replaced, and if I can get through the presentation, you'll be able to see the bolts and the checked timbers that we were talking about. And
Is there about 4,800 volts?
yeah, well, I can tell you that the contract addressed where the District 1 bridge crew kind of left off. So we were trying to get, I didn't put the contract together, but from what I've seen from the plans and what I've seen in the field, not all of them were done, and the work was concentrated in a certain area, more of the northern spans. Okay, so I'm gonna try to get through this really quick. This is the more timber deck. The rot is predominantly on the outer edges, up to 18 inches. The worst cases are near the deck drains. Go ahead and scroll through that. Again, another picture of the deck. More rot underneath the deck drains. Keep on going, we're gonna do this, I'm gonna get through this. So you can see how the timber, where it's exposed to the wind, the moisture, the sun, and if moisture is trapped in there, it's rotting, it's getting soft. But again, it's confined to the edges of the deck where the traffic is not on. We still consider this a fair deck. We're not saying that we need to put restrictions on this deck, okay? We're just documenting the condition. At that one point, he was documenting how much the drill went into the edge of the deck. More timber deck, okay. So you can see we got some soft deck on the edges and also some fungus initiating decay on the bottom of the deck. Okay, here's some bolts. Again, we're trying to document some of the, you can't really see these, but There's some pretty rusted bolts there. These are in the diagonals of the timber truss.
Do you have a measurement as to how deep the rust has progressed? Well, there you have it.
At this point, it's like we need to replace it.
Yeah.
You know.
The simple fact, sir, is that when we see corrosion to the point where it advances like that, our assumption is that it's throughout and we're not going to make that measurement. We're going to remove and replace.
All of them?
The ones that look like that, yeah, I mean, are.
But what's the threshold? 10%, 20%? Failure is in that point?
So there is a zinc coating on the bolts. As long as the zinc coating is intact, and we still are seeing a corrosion protection there, and the bolts are performing their function.
If I see any kind of measurable section loss, I'm making a recommendation to replace it.
Any measurement?
Any measurable section loss. Again, we assess to the as-built condition. We strive to keep the bridge in the as-built condition.
So the 816 volts that were replaced were the total out of the 4,800?
And that was only done, yes, that's correct, but that was done in this last contract.
Right.
And prior to that, it was District 1 Bridge Maintenance that was doing the work to replace bolts, but that work could no longer be done by the district because it became just too difficult. It was just too much for them to handle with all the other work they had. So we had to let a contract to get a contractor out here to do that work. And they not only did that, but they also repaired some rotted timbers and some spalling on the concrete towers.
Okay, did district staff demarcate what needed to be done? Contractors doing it?
Actually,
Actual work?
Structures Maintenance Investigation, Andy's crew based the work recommendations, and that was based on basically follow-up after the district performed some of the repairs, if I'm not mistaken.
Say that again?
Well, the district did their own repairs.
Right.
And then the work
But
recommendations that you made
Yeah.
were actually what went to the contract.
Yes.
You have as-bills on what the contractor did?
Yes.
So you actually met your specs?
Huh?
The contractor met the Caltrans specs?
Oh, yeah.
For replacement?
Yes. Yes, and
We had inspectors on site.
I was just going to say that the structure representative who oversaw the work did an excellent job in documenting all the bolts, where their locations, and that is in the archive right now. Yes, sir?
What were the bid items on that contract?
I believe.
Bolts each, replace?
Well, I know that the entire contract was about 800,000.
I understand, but when the contractor bid, he bid on replacing the bolts and epoxying the timber.
Yeah.
How was he paid in terms of quantities?
Oh, that's a good question. That would be a question for the structure rep in construction. I'm pretty sure that information is on the as-bills that are in the archive. I don't know that information right now. I'm pretty sure it was per bolt because they counted all the bolts, and then we actually went, I think it was 124% over the original bid.
That really isn't the gist of my question. If in the future you contract out maintenance, you will have a record of what it costs to maintain the bridge.
Yes.
And each contract that you issue will have a different number of operations related to the structure and the bolts. So are you continuing to keep a record for purposes of identifying the maintenance cost over time?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes. There was a couple pictures, like I think one back, or okay. Well, in general, we're documenting the checks and the timbers. This came up. The gentleman brought up that the checks are going to introduce a way for the moisture to get into these timber members. We're seeing that. It's pretty much throughout the main timber members, the checks. You can see these in the vertical members. And that was just an overall view. They're pretty much in every timber member. we're just showing the depth of how far the awl is going into those checks. This is a detail from the bottom of one of the truss connections. And these connections are split on they're called scabs, and they will need to be replaced. But again, we're not talking about a safety issue, we're talking about a maintenance issue.
Was that the as-built way it was done?
No, that's why I'm saying they will have to be replaced. And like I said, the draft report is in progress. We don't have a complete report to show you yet. And we're looking at decay checks on the timber bend caps. See some more checks in the timber bend caps. It's going to be more access for water intrusion and decay.
That's a pretty darn important element there, right? Just so you know.
Are you able to determine whether that happened last year or in 1947, those checks?
That's a good question. I'd have to look into that. We'd have to examine the graded record. You find that when graded timber comes out of the mills today, a certain amount of checking is accepted, particularly in wide face timber elements. What it was graded at in 43 was probably much different, much more stringent.
Is this all Douglas fir?
The towers are Doug fir. The trusses, the timber trusses and the timber decking are clear heart redwood. And that's clear heart
particularly prone to rot.
Well, clear heart redwood of that era, I think those were old growth trees. They had to be the rings per inch, the grain per inch is pretty darn dense. We can't get those. And you're right, they're not they're resistant, right?
And so is heart old growth Doug fir.
And Doug fir as well, but I'll tell you that while it's resistant, that means it takes longer than say just a stick on the ground or so forth. It's still going to happen. It's still going to happen, right?
Question, are you sure on the redwood, it was a restricted item in World War II?
I saw some correspondence, and I'm not going to try to make anything up here, but I think there had to be a special plea to go after that, because I think at first it was denied. War Department said nothing. And then we came back at them and said, you gotta have it. And they were able to get some shipments. But got to look in the record for that. I don't want to tell, that's an anecdote. I'm not going to state that as fact, right?
Frank, could you scroll back? I think there's some more attachments on one of those superstructure. Yeah. There's a couple pictures that no, it's not that one. It's those down below. These. One of the things that, again, is not a safety issue, but it kind of illustrates the decay, especially in these horizontal members. The horizontal timber where we've seen evidence now where the checks are especially where horizontal and the water can collect, and there's beginning to get some significant rot in the horizontal truss members. And then if you could bring up the other one. I think the other one is a little more advanced. You want to zoom out on that. So you can see what's happening with it. We got the checks, water's getting in there, and it's creating a wet dry condition. Okay, we can go back down to the shear ring. We found evidence of one shear ring that we could actually see. And it was due to the way it was constructed, the steel scrap. It was a timber to steel strap shear ring. It's a little further down here. There, it's up there. So this is the steel scrap. This is near the base of one of the towers. That's the timber. And then this is the shear ring. And probably because it's exposed, but it's got some corrosion on there. And if you go over to those attachments and you hit that first one, just, I wasn't sure if everybody kind of knew what the shear rings were all about, and so I just kind of, this is the big picture on the trestle. It calls for all these shear rings at the different locations and which ones they want. And then you can close that out. I got a detail right there. I think it's a little closer. So I think it's over that way. It doesn't really matter. Just for people who are maybe not aware, whenever you have the timber and timber with bolts going through them, you have these shear rings. And the next attachment I think is a little clearer. These are the as-builts, but the next one I just found a picture of one. It kind of shows just kind of more clear what it does. Let me zoom out a little bit on that. Okay, so the one that I picture of the rusted shear ring, it was a timber steel, and there's the shear ring there. And then if you scroll down to there, you can see why we can't see the shear rings, just to make it clear to everybody who wasn't sure what was going on. These are inside the two timber pieces.
Can you explain that a little more? We've heard that a lot.
It makes a bigger area to hold.
So what this does is when they're assembling these timbers, they have a little jig and they cut this out to the size of the shear ring, and then they put the timbers together and then they bolt it together. And this thing is designed to resist this kind of separating like shear.
So I could add a little bit to that. I believe you were kind of on point there. So timber crushes, right? Timber its strength perpendicular to the grain is not terrific. And so a bolted connection like that with steel against timber perpendicular to the grain, it's going to crush if the stress is high, and the stress is force over area. And so you're absolutely quite right. These shear rings are put in there to make a larger area and distribute the forces over a larger amount of the timber so that the design shear, the design demand on that is met with a reliable capacity. So that's what they're there for. And as was pointed out by Mike earlier, right, when these things get stressed up, that's when we're going to need them.
And I kind of rushed through them, in the interest of time. But all the pictures that we had before of all the bolted connections, we don't see any indirect stress. We don't see any shifting or anything like that. All we see is the rusted bolts at this point.
Time to wrap it up, Andy. We're at 8:35.
So
8:30.
I got the music. They booed me off the stage.
Can you tell me the dimensions on those shear rings, how thick the material is? And it looks like they're shaped kind of like a cup, or they just real thick. Go to the top of this section right here.
But just remember, this is just one I got off the internet.
That's the shear ring
This
right
is-
there, right?
This is just for illustrative purposes
Yeah,
only.
but this is the kind that,
It's
I mean, this
similar.
is from the as-built.
No, this is not for the
It's
as-built.
similar,
It's
sir.
not from the
It's
as-built.
similar though.
Okay.
That's why I used
My
it.
mistake.
Yeah.
The specification on the as-built called for a specified part
Yes.
or piece that was available in the day, and so we found a pretty good facsimile of that here.
Anyway, thank you again for the opportunity to present this. So, thank you.